Hey guys, tonight we're doing something that might raise a few eyebrows, and definitely some ancient eyebrows too. You've probably heard whispers about wild Roman orgies, emperors who married their horses, or rulers with harems the size of small villages. Well, buckle up, because tonight you're diving headfirst into the bedchambers of the world's most notorious emperors. And spoiler, you probably won't survive this. Not socially, morally, or even legally in some countries. But that's okay. You're here now. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not here for pity subscriptions. Drop your city and time in the comments too. I want to know who else is wide awake at 2:47 AM like me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's start with a bang, literally. You land in ancient Rome, around 37 CE, right in the middle of a palace that smells like crushed rose petals and fermented grapes. Music drips from lyres and flutes, silk curtains billow like they're trying to escape, and the air is thick with perfumes, sweat, and something more primal. You're here for the birthday party of Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, but you probably know him by his stage name Caligula. This guy doesn't believe in subtle. His parties are rumoured to last for days, sometimes weeks, and they're less celebration and more hedonistic apocalypse. You walk past fountains flowing with wine, not metaphorically, but actual red wine spilling into marble basins. Naked dancers glide through the crowd, swaying in time with the music, while elite Romans cheer, toast, and occasionally remove themselves discreetly to one of the dozens of side chambers. The walls themselves seem to blush. Caligula appears, wearing nothing but a golden cape and a crown of emeralds. He's smiling that dangerous smile that makes you wonder if he's about to kiss you or kill you. You hear someone whisper that he declared himself a living god last week. You're not surprised. This is a man who once appointed his horse as a priest, and nearly made him a consul. Legend says the horse had better manners than half the Senate. You follow the emperor as he parades through the crowd, collecting lovers as casually as the others collect coins. He's not picky, men, women, married, unmarried, it doesn't matter. His desire isn't about attraction, it's about power. Every intimate act is a declaration: I own this empire, and I can do whatever I want with it. You overhear someone say that Caligula bedded senators' wives during banquets, then describe their performance aloud over dessert. You don't doubt it. And then things start to spiral. A woman is carried in on a litter, veiled in golden silk. Whispers ripple. It's one of his sisters. Possibly Drusilla, or maybe Julia Livilla. Caligula had complicated relationships with his sisters. Ancient sources, Suetonius and Cassius Dio among them, claim he slept with all three. Some say he forced them, others hint at something more consensual, though no less disturbing. When Drusilla died young, Caligula grieved like a widower, not a brother. He declared her a goddess. The room goes quiet as she enters, or maybe the silence is just in your ears. A kind of primal discomfort, but let's zoom out. Historians still debate how much of this is true. Some say the tales of Caligula's debauchery were exaggerated by political enemies. Rome loved a good character assassination, especially when the character was already assassinating his own reputation. There's no denying he was erratic. He had people executed for minor slights, talked to the moon, and emptied the treasury on gladiator games. But was he truly the sexual monster the historians paint? Here's a fun side note. Caligula's palace had a floating pleasure barge, not a metaphor. An actual massive ship parked on Lake Nemi, complete with mosaic floors, plumbing, and yes, rooms for entertainment. Some say it was like a floating Vegas suite, without the slot machines but with much weirder uses for coins. You climb aboard in your mind's eye. Silk sheets, gold-gilded bedposts, musicians playing underwater lyres. Maybe not that last one, but honestly, who knows? When the barge was finally dredged up centuries later, it revealed heating systems and marble statues. Imagine building a luxury yacht just to throw private orgies. That's Caligula for you. Either utterly unhinged or the Roman Elon Musk. And here's where things get darker. You wander into a quieter room, hoping for a break from the spectacle. Inside, you see a group of young boys looking nervous, dressed in costumes. You remember a chilling rumour that Caligula kept a nursery of children for his own pleasure. Roman historians mention it briefly, almost like they don't want to dwell on it. Maybe you shouldn't either. But it raises a question that hangs in the air like incense. Was this debauchery the symptom of unchecked power? Or a deeply broken man hiding behind godhood and cruelty? Back in the main hall, Caligula is laughing. He's just auctioned off the wives of several noblemen to the highest bidder, pocketing the money and the gossip. You realise that sex, for emperors like him, isn't just physical. It's political, it's a tool, an extension of domination. In Rome, to conquer someone in bed was not much different than conquering a province. As the music swells again, you notice the crowd starting to thin. Not from fatigue, but fear. People know Caligula's moods are like the Tiber River, calm one moment, drowning the city the next. And no one wants to be here when the tide turns. You slip out too, heart pounding, past statues of gods with knowing eyes and the lingering scent of myrrh and regret. Outside, the air feels cleaner, colder. You look back at the palace, wondering how much of what you just saw was real, and how much was a projection, yours or history's. Caligula may have been a monster, or a tragic victim of absolute power, or more likely both. One thing's certain though, you've only just begun. There are more emperors, more scandals, and more candlelit sins waiting in the shadows of ancient history. You barely have time to shake off the scent of rose oil and terror before you're pulled into your next Roman fever dream. This time it's the palace of Emperor Nero, and if you thought Caligula was unhinged, Nero's about to set that bar on fire. Literally and figuratively, but he's the kind of guy who doesn't just play the fiddle while Rome burns. He insists on centre stage, a spotlight, and an audience that claps on cue. Tonight, though, you're not at a concert. You're somewhere more intimate. The Emperor has invited you, well, not you exactly, but the you of the story, which is a composite of about 15 confused senators and 2 terrified poets, into his private garden for an evening of wine, whispers, and some very peculiar wedding vows. And here's the twist. Nero's the bride. Yes, you read that right. The Emperor of Rome, wearing a translucent veil and golden slippers, is standing beneath a flower-drenched arch with a young man named Sporus. Some say Sporus looked like Nero's dead wife, Poppaea Sabina. Others say Nero had him castrated to fully match the image. Most agree it wasn't love. It was obsession, grief, and a taste for the bizarre all rolled into one twisted ceremony. The wedding feast is lavish. Swans roasted with pearls, honeyed dormice, fountains of wine. It's a wedding that says, I run this empire and the laws of biology can take the night off. You sip from a gold goblet and try not to make eye contact with the man now calling himself Mrs. Caesar. Nero and Sporus are just one of many couples at this table. Roman sexuality isn't about strict categories, gay, straight, bi. It's about roles. Who's the penetrator, who's the penetrated, who holds the power, and who pretends not to be watching. Across the garden, another young man catches your eye. That's Pythagoras, not the triangle guy, but another of Nero's partners. This time Nero played the groom, so in one scenario Nero marries a man and plays the bride. In another, he marries a man and plays the groom. The man contains multitudes, or possibly just deep-rooted trauma and unlimited resources. Here's the weirdest part. This wasn't scandalous in the way you'd think. Romans weren't particularly squeamish about same-sex relationships. The eyebrows only went up when emperors blurred roles that traditionally signified domination. Nero, however, bulldozed every role, category, and expectation. He didn't just bend gender norms, he set them to music, danced around them in costume, and then declared them conquered territory. Now, let's talk about Poppaea. She was his second wife and, by some accounts, the love of his life. Beautiful, ambitious, possibly manipulative, possibly just surviving the madness. She was pregnant when he kicked her to death. That detail's in most ancient sources. Whether it's entirely true is debated. Some say it might have been an accident, others say it was rage. Nero later had her embalmed with perfumes and buried with honours. Grief can make people do strange things, or maybe guilt did, but Poppaea doesn't really leave. Not mentally, anyway. Her presence haunts Nero's later relationships, especially the ones where he tries to recreate her in younger bodies, Sporus being the most tragic example. Imagine being 13 and told you now live in the imperial palace as the emperor's wife. Now imagine the empire just nodding and moving on to the next scandal. You walk through another room, this time a golden one, literally. Nero's Domus Aurea, the golden house, gleams under lamplight. Walls coated in gold leaf, ceilings dotted with stars. Revolving dining room so that the sun and moon could witness every course. Somewhere in there, someone's playing a kithara, probably Nero himself. He thought of himself as an artist first, Emperor second, moral compass never. He performed publicly, much to the horror of the elite, because emperors weren't supposed to work for applause, but Nero lived for it. Here's your quirky fact. Nero once participated in the Olympics, in Greece, naturally, and won every event he entered, including chariot racing, despite falling off his chariot. You don't need to be a historian to figure out how that worked. Spoiler, no one wanted to beat the emperor. Back in the palace, Nero's throwing another performance. This one involves actors, musicians, and a curated audience, half drunk, half terrified. You're seated between a philosopher who's trying to pretend this is fine, and a senator who's already planning an alibi. The emperor steps on stage wearing something silk and scandalous, and he sings. Hours pass. Applause is mandatory. The act of not clapping with enough enthusiasm could land you in an unmarked grave. By now, the excess is starting to feel heavy. The kind of decadence that rots from the inside. You see it in the eyes of the slaves who refill your wine, in the nervous smiles of courtiers, in the way everyone laughs too hard at Nero's jokes. Power here isn't just absolute, it's intimate. It invades every room, every bed, every breath. But let's pause. Scholars still argue whether Nero's sexuality was as fluid and flamboyant as the ancient texts suggest. Some say it was Roman gossip, exaggerated by writers who wanted to paint him as depraved. Others say the pattern is too consistent to be fiction. Either way, his legacy is a fever dream of sex, politics, and performance art. And in a world where the emperor's whim is law, who's going to tell him no? Eventually, it all collapses. The Senate turns, Nero flees, surrounded by the last loyal few, including Sporus. He prepares to take his own life. He can't do it. A servant has to finish the job. His final words? Supposedly, "What an artist dies in me." Fitting. You walk away from the smouldering ruins of Nero's palace. The echo of lyres still hanging in the night air. It's quieter now. Rome will move on. Another emperor, another scandal. But the shadow of Nero lingers, in the golden walls, in the broken hearts, in the rumours that refuse to die. You'd think, after Nero's velvet-draped chaos, that Rome might take a breather, maybe pick someone a little more grounded. But no. Enter Elagabalus, 14 years old, crowned emperor, already addicted to incense, divine titles, and the sound of gasping courtiers. You're not even sure how you got into his palace. Everything smells like jasmine and honey, and there's a faint sound of bells ringing from behind every curtain. It's less of a royal court and more of a sensual fever dream designed by a particularly flamboyant demigod. Elagabalus? Yes, that's his name, although technically it's the name of the sun god from Syria that he worships, is one of the most gender-fluid figures to ever sit on an imperial throne, and he's not shy about it. He prefers to be called Lady, wears makeup in public, and hosts banquets where he changes outfits between courses like it's Fashion Week BCE. You spot him reclining on a sofa embroidered with peacocks, sipping something that looks suspiciously like gold dust in wine. He turns his gaze on you and smirks, like he's already decided whether you'll be fun or dinner. Born in Syria and brought to Rome by his power-hungry grandmother, Elagabalus was installed on the throne through a whirlwind of bribery, strategic gossip, and good old-fashioned assassination. The empire expected a puppet. What they got was a teenage sun priest who believed he was the earthly vessel of a foreign god and who made every toga in the city feel wildly underdressed. He doesn't just bring his god to Rome, he tries to replace Jupiter with him. Think of it like showing up to the Vatican and suggesting everyone worship your personal lava lamp instead. Temples are torn down, statues of Roman gods are boxed up, and in their place Elagabalus erects a shrine to the sun god Elagabal, complete with meteorite centerpiece and blood sacrifices. He personally performs the rites, dressed in silk robes with painted eyes and a smile that says, "I know you hate this, and I absolutely don't care." Now, about those orgies. Because of course there are orgies. But not just the Roman kind, these are elaborate ritualistic affairs dedicated to pleasing the gods. The emperor claims that sensual pleasure is divine devotion. There are dancers, musicians, scented oils, and offerings of live peacocks and gold coins. You're not sure which gods are being pleased, but judging by the flushed faces and ruined togas, somebody definitely is. One of the more whispered tales involves Elagabalus building a massive revolving room with a ceiling designed to drop rose petals and perfume on guests during dinner. Sounds nice until you learn that once, The petals dropped in such overwhelming quantities that some guests suffocated. Death by flowers. Romantic in a horrifying way. Here's your quirky detail. Elagabalus is said to have offered enormous sums of money to any physician who could surgically turn him into a woman. That's right, he wanted a full-on gender transition. This was, of course, impossible by Roman medical standards, but that didn't stop him from trying. He reportedly referred to himself as a wife, and even took a male charioteer, Hierocles, as his husband, parading him publicly and calling him my dear. Again, 14 years old when this starts. By 17 he'd already had several marriages, both to women and men. Some of his partners were official, wedding ceremonies and all, while others were more spontaneous. One anecdote claims he had wandered the palace at night, dressed as a prostitute, asking guards to guess who he was. If they guessed wrong, or worse, refused, well, let's just say the emperor didn't handle rejection gracefully. But even for Rome, this was a lot. The Senate murmured. The military clenched its teeth. His own family started side-eyeing him at breakfast. Eventually, even Grandma Julia Mesa, who had masterminded his rise to power, decided enough was enough. When your biggest political supporter quietly begins grooming your cousin to replace you, the writing's on the wall, even if that wall is made of mother of pearl and imported from Carthage. The scholarly debate here is interesting. Was Elagabalus truly non-binary? A trans woman? Simply theatrical? Or just a reckless teenager drunk on power and incense? The sources, written long after his death, often by authors with obvious bias, don't agree. Some portray him as a perverse clown, others as a tragic figure pushing boundaries Rome refused to bend. It's hard to say where performance ends and identity begins when you're dealing with ancient emperors and the subjective pens of ancient gossips. Eventually the empire says no more. Elagabalus and his mother are dragged from the palace by the Praetorian Guard. Their bodies are thrown into the Tiber. No funeral, no honours, just a swift, brutal erasure. His cousin, Alexander Severus, takes over and immediately Rome pretends none of this ever happened. The temple is torn down, the sun god exiled. Historians told to write something more palatable. And yet, Elagabalus lingers, in legends, in footnotes, in quiet corners of museums where coins bearing his image still sparkle. You can't help but feel a little sympathy. Yes, he was chaotic. Yes, he wielded power with dangerous frivolity. But he was also a teenager exploring gender, faith, and identity in a time that punished deviation with death. He wasn't a monster. He was a mirror, held up to a city that claimed tolerance but flinched at every reflection that didn't look like Jupiter. As you walk away from the perfumed ruins of his palace, the smell of incense still clings to your clothes. Somewhere, you think, there's still a party happening in his name, loud, defiant, full of silk and unapologetic joy. And if the gods are watching, maybe they're smiling too. You barely wipe the incense off your boots before you're being rowed across crystalline blue waters under the blazing Italian sun. The oars splash rhythmically, and the cliffs of Capri rise like sleeping beasts from the sea. You're approaching a dream, or maybe a nightmare, depending on how you feel about power, isolation, and men with god complexes. This is Villa Jovis, the cliffside palace of Emperor Tiberius, and it's here that history takes one of its darker turns. Let's set the mood. Marble steps carved into the rock, seawater pools with dolphins kept for entertainment, servants in linen skirts flitting silently from room to room. Everything is clean, clinical, and terrifyingly beautiful. But don't let the peaceful view fool you. Tiberius didn't come to Capri for the views. He came to vanish, and to do things away from the prying eyes of Rome. By the time he retreated here, Tiberius had already lived multiple lives. War hero, reluctant emperor, adoptive son of Augustus, deeply awkward public speaker, and, increasingly, a man worn down by paranoia. He'd lost children, lost friends, lost patience with the Senate. So, around age 60, he handed off daily governance to his Praetorian prefect Sejanus, and boarded a boat to Capri. Most people assumed he was retiring. Turns out he was just relocating his peculiar brand of empire. The stories that emerged from the island are some of the most salacious and unsettling in all of Roman lore. This is where the whispers begin, of orgies held on sun-drenched balconies, of nude swimmers in elaborate grottos, of games played not for fun but domination. You wander into one of the famed baths, tiled in turquoise and lit by skylights. Perfumed steam coils around you. You hear laughter, young, high-pitched, uneasy. The so-called Tiberian nursery is mentioned in several ancient sources, though some scholars debate its existence. Suetonius, never one to hold back, claimed Tiberius kept young boys and girls for sexual entertainment, training them like pets, rewarding them with figs dipped in honey, punishing them with cruelty. It's grotesque and possibly exaggerated, but even if a fraction of it is true, the picture it paints is grim. He was known to use sexual humiliation as a tool for control, not just for pleasure, though that was certainly a part of it, but as a way to exert dominance over everyone who came into his orbit. Guests were carefully watched, servants were used and discarded. His paranoia, already sharpened by years of political betrayal, mutated into sadism. If he thought you were disloyal, you didn't get a warning. You disappeared. There's a quiet debate among historians about whether these stories were politically motivated. Tiberius left Rome in the hands of Sejanus, who executed senators left and right. When Sejanus fell from grace and was killed, the Senate needed a villain to blame. Tiberius, holed up on his island with no way to defend himself, became the scapegoat. And in Rome, when someone falls, they don't just fall, they plummet into the filthiest pit the public imagination can conjure. Still, even the more reserved accounts describe a man who had completely detached from reality. He wandered his massive villa in silk robes, muttering to himself, obsessively rereading letters from spies. He rarely bathed, they say, and when he did, it was in tubs of perfumed milk. Whether or not the rumours of child orgies were true, it's undeniable that Tiberius created a moral vacuum, one where power was the only law and pleasure the only religion. Here's something quirky. Tiberius had a thing for astrologers. He was obsessed with them. He once executed a man for predicting the emperor's death, but later called him clever for being right. He loved testing their skills, often bringing them close and watching them sweat, and then either rewarding or destroying them depending on how entertaining their answers were. Capri wasn't just a place for sensual retreat, it was a laboratory for testing human behaviour under pressure. You step into a room that overlooks a sheer cliff. This is where reportedly Tiberius had prisoners flung to their deaths. Guards waited below to beat any survivors to death with clubs. Tiberius called it justice. You call it psychopathy. The sea sparkles below, innocent and blue, belying the screams it once swallowed. One of the few people allowed consistent access to Tiberius in his later years was Caligula. Yes, that Caligula. He was young, beautiful, and knew exactly how to survive. He played whatever role was required. Grandson, court jester, therapist, spy. He watched Tiberius closely, learned from him, absorbed his methods like smoke clinging to velvet. When Tiberius died, rumours spread that Caligula smothered him with a pillow. No one mourned. Let's be honest, though. Tiberius didn't start out this way. As a younger man, he was disciplined, aloof, almost stoic. He loathed public attention, dreaded ceremonies, and often seemed like he was doing his job under protest. He wasn't a born monster, more like someone who slowly curdled under the heat of absolute power and bitter solitude. That's what makes him chilling. He's the reminder that monsters aren't always born. They're built, one betrayal, one paranoia-fueled decision at a time. You walk down the winding stone paths of Villa Jovis, the scent of salt and thyme in the air. The view is stunning. You can see the entire bay, tiny boats bobbing like corks, birds wheeling in the distance, and you wonder, did Tiberius ever stop and look, or was he too lost in his labyrinth of pleasure and punishment? By the time he died in 37 CE, he had ruled for over 2 decades. Rome was still standing, the empire hadn't collapsed, but something else had. A line had been crossed. The emperor, that semi-divine figure who was supposed to embody virtue and authority, had turned into a reclusive predator on a rock. And nobody, not the Senate, not the people, not even the gods, had the courage to stop him. The boat pulls away from Capri. The cliffs recede. The sea closes over the past, as if nothing ever happened. But you know better. You've seen the rooms, you've smelled the perfumes, you've heard the laughter and the silence that follows it, and the next emperor is already waiting in the wings, ready to inherit the throne, and all the ghosts that come with it. You don't even have time to shake the chill of Capri off your skin before you're transported to a slower, softer scene. The air is warm but dry, scented with reeds and lotus blossoms. You're in Egypt. floating gently down the Nile on a luxurious barge painted with stars and flanked by marble columns. The man reclining beside you isn't a Roman emperor, though he might as well be. He's Hadrian, ruler of the Roman Empire at its absolute peak, and tonight, for once, the story is not about excess or horror. It's about longing. Hadrian is a different flavour of emperor. Stoic, cultured, fiercely intelligent, and honestly kind of moody. He's a builder, not just of monuments, but of identities. His empire stretches from Britannia to Judea, and yet here he is, drifting slowly on a boat beside a young man named Antinous, barely 20, with dark curls and a quiet smile. The two are inseparable. You notice it immediately. The soft way Hadrian watches him, the way Antinous listens, half shy, half reverent. This is no casual fling, this is devotion. Now you're probably wondering, was it romantic, sexual, platonic? The sources are fuzzy as usual. Roman writers, uncomfortable with open sentiment between men of equal status, danced around the nature of their relationship. But the monuments Hadrian later erected tell the real story. You don't deify a fishing buddy. You don't build statues across the empire and name entire cities after someone, unless that person cracked your heart wide open. Their journey through Egypt is a blend of diplomacy and dreamscape. Hadrian loved Greek culture, art and mystery religions. Egypt, with its temples, gods and timeless desert, spoke to something deep in him. Antinous, young, Greek, beautiful, seemed like the living embodiment of that fascination. Together they visit the pyramids. They pray in temples older than Rome itself. They stay up late on the boat, whispering under the stars, and then tragedy. Somewhere near the city of Hermopolis, Antinous drowns in the Nile. Hadrian is inconsolable. What happened is still debated. Was it an accident, a suicide, a ritual sacrifice? Some say Antinous willingly gave his life to extend Hadrian's, a kind of mystical trade rooted in Egyptian beliefs. Others think he simply fell or was pushed. The river doesn't give up answers, only myths. But Hadrian doesn't just grieve, he immortalizes. He declares Antinous a god. A new cult rises around him, complete with priests, altars, festivals. His statues are everywhere, from Britain to Syria, always youthful, always serene. In one he's Dionysus, in another Osiris. He becomes not just a memory, but a symbol of beauty, of love, of tragic loss. You stand in a temple Hadrian built for him, the stone cool beneath your feet, the incense still clinging to the air. A priest lights a candle and sings a hymn in Greek. It's intimate. You realise you're not just watching an emperor mourn, you're watching him rewrite the rules of remembrance. In Rome, heroes become gods through conquest. Antinous becomes one through affection. Here's a curious side note. Hadrian's obsession with symmetry and harmony extended even to his personal life. He famously wore a beard, shocking at the time, because he admired Greek philosophers, but some whispered it was also to match Antinous, who had just begun to grow his own. In a society where older men often pursued younger ones in unbalanced relationships, Hadrian's love seemed more equal, more spiritual, or maybe he just wanted it to appear that way. Hadrian would go on ruling for years after Antinous' death, but something in him changed. His letters became more melancholy, his travels less frequent. He built Hadrian's Wall in Britain, a massive frontier fortification, as if trying to hold the world together with stone and willpower. But even stone weathers, even gods fade, there was something eerily modern about Hadrian and Antinous. Their relationship, clouded by ambiguity, transcending simple definitions, feels like something that could be dissected in a university lecture, or whispered about in a gallery hallway. You're struck by how little has changed. Love still confuses people, loss still shapes empires. You glance at a coin bearing Antinous' profile. He looks serene, idealized. But what did he think of all this? He didn't leave letters, declarations, temples. His image became public property. His story was curated by the man who loved him, and who had the power to mythologize that love. That's the part that stings guys a little. Was he honoured or objectified? Worshipped or consumed? And here's the scholarly debate. Was Antinous' deification genuine religious devotion, or a calculated act of imperial propaganda? Hadrian faced criticism in Rome, especially for spending more time abroad than in the capital. By creating a new god, he may have hoped to solidify his legacy in the East, curry favour with mystics, and distract from political tension. A divine boyfriend is a bold rebrand, but as you float once more down the Nile in your mind, it's hard not to be moved. The reeds whisper, the stars flicker, and in the quiet you can almost hear two voices, one teaching, one laughing. You don't need to know every detail to understand the feeling. You've been in love, or at least near enough to it to recognise its ghosts. You step off the barge as it docks, the temple fades behind you, the river carries the secrets onward. And far away in some quiet corner of Rome, Hadrian sits in his villa, drawing sketches of Antinous' face, trying to remember exactly how he smiled when he thought no one was watching. The wind changes, the Nile fades. Suddenly the air grows hotter, heavier, more electric, as if history itself is holding its breath. You blink, and you're on horseback, galloping across a wide, dusty plain surrounded by shouting men in bronze armour. Spears glint in the sun, drums pound like thunder. You've arrived in the world of Alexander the Great, the boy who became a god, the man who conquered half the known world by the time most people are still figuring out taxes. But tonight we're not talking tactics. We're here for something more intimate, the relationships that followed him from battlefield to bedroll. He's barely 20, and already the king of Macedon, the general of Greece, and the kind of guy whose wedding invitations would include "bring a sword." But alongside his victories, there's always someone close, closer than even his most loyal officers, Hephaestion, his childhood friend, his second-in-command, and according to many, his lover. The two are nearly inseparable. They share tents, strategies, secrets. Hephaestion is the calm to Alexander's fire, the man who can speak bluntly without fear, who rides at his side into every storm. You see them together in Babylon during a rare quiet night. The tents are massive, almost palatial, with incense burning low and wine flowing freely. Alexander leans back, tired but triumphant, eyes always drifting to Hephaestion, like gravity has its own opinion. They talk in hushed tones, of gods, of legacy, of what comes next, and when the others are dismissed, the tent stays quiet. You get the sense that nothing is hidden here. Not in body, not in mind. Was it love? Almost certainly. Was it physical? Maybe. Ancient Macedonians didn't think in strict labels like we do. Their world wasn't about orientation. It was about roles, loyalty, and what you dared to admit out loud. Alexander famously said he loved Hephaestion as Achilles loved Patroclus, a declaration loaded with mythic, homoerotic bullshit. If you're not familiar, Achilles grieved Patroclus so intensely he nearly destroyed himself, and many versions of the myth portray them as lovers. When Hephaestion died suddenly, Alexander shaved his head, banned music, and wept in front of his army. He built shrines, ordered sacrifices, and demanded he be honoured as a demigod. That doesn't sound like just friends. Here's a quirky detail. Alexander reportedly carried a copy of the Iliad under his pillow every night, annotated by Aristotle himself. Some say he saw himself as Achilles reborn, and Hephaestion as his Patroclus, which sounds poetic until you remember these guys also razed cities, crucified rebels, and declared themselves gods after particularly good battle wins. But Hephaestion wasn't the only figure in Alexander's vast constellation of intimacy. There was Roxana, the Bactrian princess he married, beautiful, bold, fierce, and politically necessary. Their union wasn't just about love, it was about securing loyalty from the newly conquered East. Roxana reportedly adored him and was fiercely protective after his death. But was she the one who held his heart, or just his legacy? And then there's the legendary night in Persia when Alexander, in full conqueror glory, hosts a mass wedding. He and 90 of his generals marry Persian noblewomen in a grand fusion of East and West. Imagine trying to remember names at that reception. Was it cultural unity or another flex of control? Hard to say. But it's clear that Alexander saw intimacy as both personal and political, another battlefield to master. Not everyone in his circle appreciated his bonds. Many Greek officers sneered at his Persian clothing, his rituals, the way he kissed his friends in public like some Eastern mystic. But Alexander didn't care. He was trying to become something bigger, something not quite Greek, not quite Persian, but divine. He said he was the son of Zeus Ammon. And once you start calling yourself the child of a thunder god, honestly, human relationships probably feel quaint. Still, the human part never fully leaves him. After Hephaestion's death, Alexander becomes haunted You can feel it. He wanders temples, demands oracles, pushes his army further east as if trying to outrun grief. Some say he lost his mind, others say he lost his heart. He never recovers. Within a year, he's dead too. Fever, poison, exhaustion? Nobody knows. Scholars are still arguing. Here's the debate, and was Alexander truly bisexual? Was his love for Hephaestion platonic, romantic, political, or all of the above? The Greeks didn't make clean categories. But modern scholars can't help trying. What's clear is that Alexander lived his emotional life like he lived his military one, with intensity, strategy, and no hesitation. You stand at his empty tomb, because yes, to this day no one knows exactly where his body lies. A monument here, a relic there, but no confirmed burial. He vanished into legend, leaving behind cities named after him, empires shattered in his wake, and love stories scribbled in the margins of history. And yet, even after the battles, the cities, the declarations of divinity, it's the image of Alexander and Hephaestion, young, golden, fearless, that lingers. Not the emperor, not the god, just two men sharing a tent under desert stars, dreaming of worlds yet to conquer, and maybe for a few moments forgetting that time would conquer them first. You barely have time to brush the dust of Persia from your tunic before the air thickens with jasmine, musk, and power. You're stepping into a chamber draped in sheer linen, the floor cool beneath your feet, the walls glittering with gold leaf and lapis lazuli. You're in Alexandria, though you could just as easily be in Rome or Tarsus or sailing down the Nile. The exact location doesn't matter. What matters is her, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, last of the Ptolemies, and tonight you're navigating not just her palace, but her bedchamber, and trust me, both are traps laid with honey. Cleopatra doesn't just seduce people, she destabilizes empires. You don't walk into her world without losing something, sleep, pride, occasionally your republic, and she doesn't do it with cleavage or perfume alone. This is a woman fluent in 9 languages, trained in philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy, and capable of arguing down any senator in Latin. Her mind is as sharp as the coal lines around her eyes. You're here during the early days of her legendary affair with Julius Caesar. She's about 21, exiled from her throne by her brother husband. Yes, the Ptolemies kept it all in the family. Think of it as a sort of dynastic Tinder with 0 outside options. When she hears Caesar is in town, she doesn't beg. She doesn't plead. She has herself rolled into a carpet and delivered to his chambers like a very confident Amazon package. When the rug unfurls, there she is, powdered, poised, probably already plotting. Caesar is no fool, but he's immediately smitten. It's not just the beauty, it's the timing. He's deep into his Roman midlife crisis. The Senate hates him. The Republic is fraying, and suddenly here's a queen who treats him like a living god. Their affair is both passionate and pragmatic. She wants her throne back. He wants control of Egypt's grain. What starts as strategy quickly turns into something else. Soon they're inseparable. He installs her as queen again, leaving her younger brother mysteriously drowned in the Nile. A few months later, she gives birth to a son, Caesarion. The name is a not-so-subtle hint. Little Caesar, the boy who might unify the Roman world and the Egyptian crown. Whether Caesar ever fully acknowledged the child is debated, but Cleopatra did. She declared him heir, the next divine ruler, her living claim to immortality. You watch them together on a barge drifting down the Nile. The deck is covered in flower petals, musicians play soft flutes, and servants in translucent linen offer trays of figs and dates. Cleopatra sits beside Caesar, laughing at something he says in Greek. He smiles, but you can see the gears turning behind his eyes. Even here, in this moment of supposed leisure, politics hum just beneath the surface. But Caesar's not built for slow seductions. Rome calls, he leaves for good, and you already know how that ends, stabbed 23 times on the Ides of March. Cleopatra hears the news in her palace and locks the doors. For a while it seems like the dream is over, but then comes Mark Antony. You almost want to say enter, stage left, because this is where the love story goes full Shakespeare. Antony meets Cleopatra not as a conqueror, but as a supplicant. He needs money, ships, soldiers. She, as always, gives him much more. Their first meeting in Tarsus is legendary. She sails up the river on a ship with silver sails, dressed as the goddess Isis. Perfumes fill the air, the water is said to shimmer. Antony is not ready, but he's definitely interested. What follows is a whirlwind. They drink together, laugh, hold elaborate feasts where the wine never stops flowing and the guests are required to make fools of themselves. They form a drinking club called the Inimitable Livers, which honestly sounds like a failed punk band but was in reality just a very ancient form of blackout brunch. They prank each other, throw gold coins into the sea, and indulge in everything from tiger parades to pearl-dissolving wine cocktails. And yes, according to Pliny, she once dropped a priceless pearl into vinegar, drank it, and dared Antony to match her. It wasn't just about indulgence, it was about proving they could live like gods. She as Isis, he as Dionysus. Their love was performance, mythology, and propaganda rolled into one intoxicating show. But behind the scenes, there was strategy. Cleopatra needed Roman protection. Antony needed Egyptian wealth. And they both wanted Caesar's successor, Octavian, later Augustus, off their backs. Their union produced 3 children, extravagant temples, and a mounting tension with Rome. You watch the empire grow uneasy. This isn't just an affair. It's a potential second power base. Rome can't have 2 rulers playing king and queen of the East. That's not how the story's supposed to go. Here's the debate. Was Cleopatra truly in love with either Caesar or Antony? Or were they just pieces on her chessboard? Historians have split on this for centuries. Some call her manipulative. Others say she was forced to play the game to survive in a world where female power was constantly under siege. There's no denying her intelligence, nor the way she wielded affection as a political tool, but whether she loved or just used remains buried beneath centuries of drama and dust. You know how this ends? The Battle of Actium, a botched naval fight. Antony flees, Cleopatra follows, Rome wins. Back in Alexandria, with Octavian's legions closing in, the lovers hole up in the palace one last time. Antony falls on his sword, literally, and bleeds out in her arms. Cleopatra, days later, famously ends her life, possibly with a venomous asp, though modern scholars argue it might have been poison in a hairpin. Either way, her final act is as dramatic as the rest. Death by symbolism wrapped in gold, surrounded by her treasures. You stand at her empty tomb. Like Alexander's, it's lost to time, but her legend isn't. Even now, centuries later, her name still carries that electric charge. She wasn't just a lover of emperors, she was a queen who dared to become their equal, their rival, their undoing. And in the quiet that follows her story, you can still hear the echo of her laughter, light and dangerous, floating down the Nile like a warning. The air shifts again, trading Nile breezes for the dry, metallic scent of scorched earth and incense. You're standing at the foot of a vast, gleaming mausoleum, its bronze doors etched with dragons and clouds. You've landed in ancient China, in the capital of a newly unified empire, where walls stretch across mountains and a single man claims the mandate of heaven. His name is Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, and while he's remembered for conquering kingdoms and standardizing currency, tonight you're peeking behind the curtain of jade screens and palace walls to uncover something far stranger, his erotic quest for immortality. The palace complex is massive, larger than most cities, filled with gilded pavilions, sunken bathhouses, and artificial rivers snaking through fragrant gardens. You walk quietly through corridors tiled in obsidian, past eunuchs who avoid your gaze and concubines trained to walk like clouds. Qin Shi Huang is in his private study, poring over scrolls, but these aren't records of conquest. They are treatises on Taoist alchemy, obscure medical manuals, and whispered recipes for eternal life, many of which involve a disturbing number of rare herbs and, unfortunately, mercury. At first glance, the emperor doesn't fit the pattern of our previous emperors. He isn't throwing orgies. There are no gold-smeared orgiastic festivals. He's not seducing senators or commissioning lover-shaped temples. But peel back the layers and you'll find something just as wild, just quieter. The first emperor's sexuality wasn't about spectacle. It was about control, ritual, and legacy. Let's talk concubines. Dozens, hundreds, probably thousands. He didn't just collect lovers, he curated them. Each woman in his harem was selected for youth, beauty, astrological compatibility, and of course, the correct energy balance. The emperor, according to Taoist belief, could increase his lifespan by drawing on female yin through sexual contact. But not just any contact. Oh no. There were rules. In these bedroom rituals, the emperor would absorb the vital energy, or jing, of his partners. The women, in turn, were not supposed to climax. That would waste the energy. Instead, Qin Shi Huang would prolong intercourse as long as possible to build power, like a tantric battery. The goal wasn't pleasure, it was transcendence. Imagine a sex life that doubles as a sacred duty, backed by spiritual advisors with charts, manuals, and deeply uncomfortable eye contact. Now here's the weird part. He didn't just pursue this knowledge with living women. The same Taoist texts claimed that certain elixirs, made from mercury, jade powder, and other exotic substances, could also grant immortality. So Qin Shi Huang began ingesting them regularly. Mercury pills, mercury wine, mercury incense. It's a miracle he didn't glow in the dark. He even sent entire fleets of ships to the eastern seas in search of the legendary Isles of the Immortals. Young boys and girls were chosen for the journey, supposedly the purest souls untouched by sin, led by court mystics who claimed they could bargain with the gods. None of them ever came back. Maybe they died. Maybe they ran. Maybe they found something the Emperor never would. Either way, Qin Shi Huang kept waiting. You're led now into his inner sanctum where the floor is chilled with ice blocks hauled from mountaintops to keep his sacred scrolls from mildew. Here, servants whisper about his insomnia. He hasn't slept properly in years. He believes demons are trying to poison him. Some say he stopped trusting his concubines, thinking they were part of the plots. Others say he grew obsessed with dreams of previous lives. You watch as he drinks another tincture. His lips are stained red, his hands tremble. Here's a curious fact. Upon his death, his tomb, yes, the famous one with the terracotta army, was rigged with rivers of mercury meant to represent flowing water. The same substance he believed would keep him alive was poured into his grave to replicate the eternal energy of the world he ruled. Even in death, he wasn't letting go. But let's back up a second. Did any of these alchemical bedroom practices work? The scholarly answer is debatable. The Taoist texts promoting these rituals weren't exactly peer-reviewed. Some believe the emperor misunderstood or corrupted spiritual traditions in his desperation. Others argue the real power lay in the symbolism, the emperor becoming a divine force through rituals of balance and dominance. And then there's the darker reading, one of a man so terrified of death that he commodified human intimacy into a mechanical act of spiritual vampirism. And what of the women? What did it feel like to be summoned not for romance, but for energetic drainage? Were they willing participants, victims, vessels? Their names are lost, their voices swallowed by the grand machinery of empire. But somewhere, surely, someone whispered a complaint behind a silk curtain or rolled her eyes at the notion of not climaxing for the emperor's health. There's something eerily sterile about Qin Shi Huang's sexual world. It's all spreadsheets and incense. No poetry, no laughter, just a man trying to bargain with the universe through rituals he never fully understood. You wonder, as you watch him pace the jade halls alone, if he ever felt the simple kind of love, the messy, chaotic, wonderful kind that doesn't care about jing or balance, but about holding someone and forgetting the stars. He died young by emperor standards, just 49, likely poisoned by the very elixirs meant to preserve him. His empire fractured within a few years. His grand tomb remains unopened, a sealed promise to the afterlife, cautionary tale wrapped in stone. You leave the palace, the scent of sandalwood still clinging to your clothes, and glance back one last time. In the end, Qin Shi Huang didn't want sex for pleasure. He wanted it for power, for eternity, for peace of mind he never found. And perhaps that's the most tragic seduction of all. Not of lovers, but of death itself. The heat fades, the mercury haze lifts. Now you're standing on red earth, warm under your feet, surrounded by the rhythmic chanting of monks and the distant clang of bells. This isn't Rome, or Egypt, or China. This is ancient India, and the man walking slowly toward a stone platform isn't just a king, he's a turning point. Meet Ashoka, conqueror of kingdoms, emperor of the Maurya dynasty, and later poster child for one of the most radical image overhauls in human history. But before he was inscribing Buddhist edicts on the pillars across the subcontinent, he was known for something far less peaceful, his bloodlust and his bedroom. You catch him in the earlier part of his life, just after ascending the throne through a mix of military aggression and ruthless ambition. Some sources say he killed 99 of his brothers to seize power. Others suggest a less dramatic but still cutthroat consolidation of authority. Either way, the man you're watching is young, arrogant, and by all accounts extremely popular with the ladies. Before he found enlightenment, Ashoka indulged deeply, especially when it came to women. His harem was famously vast, so much so that it required its own palace wing, complete with attendants, musicians, and a strict rotation schedule. The women came from across the empire, dancers from the Deccan, princesses from Bengal, courtesans from Sri Lanka. This wasn't just pleasure, it was political theatre. Each new lover was a treaty, a symbol of submission, or sometimes just a reward to himself for conquering a region. You walk past gardens laced with jasmine and moonflowers, where women recline on stone benches, their eyes following the emperor like stars tracking the moon. There's affection here, maybe even some power play, but don't mistake it for equality. And then there's the story of Tishyaraksha, one of his later wives, beautiful, ambitious, and rumoured to have started as a royal dancer before seducing her way into the emperor's bed. Some versions of the tale say she orchestrated the blinding of Ashoka's son Kunala, fearing the boy would grow to eclipse her influence. It's hard to separate myth from record, especially when women in history are so often flattened into villain or victim. Still, her presence in the royal court was enough to turn heads and twist knives. Ashoka, in his early reign, was both feared and admired for his cruelty. He had a place called the Hell of Ashoka, a torture chamber so sadistic it was described as a vision of the Buddhist hell realms. Think burning pits, walls of spikes, and guards trained to invent new forms of agony. It's said that no one entered and left alive. So yes, maybe not the guy you'd swipe right on unless you were also deeply into regime change. But then something shifts. You're there when he stands on the battlefield of Kalinga, surrounded by corpses. The war was won, but the cost was staggering. Over 100,000 dead, rivers running red, children crying for parents who would never come. Ashoka surveys the carnage and something breaks. Not in his body, in his soul. It's here, in the silence of post-battle horror, that his transformation begins. He turns to Buddhism, not just as a faith but as a philosophy. He renounces violence, embraces compassion, and launches a massive campaign to spread Dharma across the empire. Edicts are carved into rocks and pillars, instructing subjects to be kind, to avoid greed, to practice restraint, even in the bedroom. Yes, that includes him. The harem doesn't disappear, but it changes. The wild indulgence is slow. The emperor no longer views women as prizes or pawns, but as fellow seekers of wisdom. He supports women in religious life, funds monasteries, and even sends his own children as missionaries. In a society that still saw sensual pleasure as part of life, Ashoka didn't go full celibate monk, but he learned to let go of desire as a form of control. Here's a strange little detail. Ashoka once sent a royal envoy to ancient Greece, complete with Buddhist texts translated into local dialects. Imagine trying to explain samsara and karma to a Macedonian philosopher, sipping wine under a statue of Athena. Whether the message was received or lost in translation, no one knows, but the ambition is impressive. Ashoka didn't just want to change himself, he wanted to reshape the world's idea of power. The scholarly debate around his transformation is juicy. Some argue it was sincere, guilt-driven, a real reckoning with mortality and suffering. Others say it was PR, a rebranding of a ruthless tyrant into a philosopher king to secure legacy and pacify rebellion. After all, a compassionate ruler is a lot harder to plot against, and who controls the narrative when you're the one carving it into stone? But even if the conversion was political, the impact was real. You walk past one of his edicts, the words still sharp after thousands of years. They speak of justice, tolerance, ethical living, not your usual imperial brag. Ashoka didn't just write these values, he tried to live them, in palaces and in bed. Still, you wonder, what did he feel in those quiet moments? Did he miss the thrill of conquest? Did he glance at his concubines and remember the old days with shame or nostalgia? Did he trust himself around beauty anymore? Change is never total. Even emperors carry ghosts in their robes. One thing's certain. When Ashoka died, he left behind an empire unlike anything the world had seen. A vast territory tied together not by fear, but by values. His harem no longer whispered like it once did. The rooms were quieter, the evenings less wild. But perhaps that silence was its own kind of peace. As you leave the palace, you see a simple statue of the Buddha in a garden blooming with lotus. The emperor once worshipped here, barefoot, incense in hand, not as a god, not even as a king, just a man who had done terrible things, trying at last to do better. You're standing in a desert of gold dust and heat haze, surrounded by pyramids that shimmer in the midday sun like memories half buried in time. But this isn't the Egypt you just left with Cleopatra. No Nile barges, no Roman senators getting tipsy on pomegranate wine. This is a stranger, older Egypt, and the man at the centre of it all is Akhenaten, pharaoh, poet, prophet, or possibly just completely unhinged. You're here to peer into one of the weirdest, most sexually and spiritually charged royal lives in history. And trust me, you've never seen ancient power like this. He doesn't look like other pharaohs. First of all, he's gangly. His limbs are long, his chest oddly rounded, and his face elongated like someone gently pulled it downward at birth. Ancient depictions exaggerate these features, giving him a curiously androgynous figure. Not exactly the square-jawed warrior king his ancestors were. Scholars have debated for centuries whether this was artistic style, a genetic disorder, or something more symbolic. Maybe Akhenaten wanted to show he was above earthly forms, neither fully male nor female, but divine, fluid, otherworldly. Or maybe he just really liked weird statues. You're watching him now in his new capital, Akhenaten, horizon of the Aten. He built it from scratch in the desert, abandoning traditional religious centres and dragging the entire court with him. Why? Because Akhenaten had fallen in love with a god, or more accurately, a disk. The Aten, the solar disk, the visible sun which he declared the only deity worthy of worship. Forget Ra, forget Osiris, forget all the cosy, familiar gods the Egyptians had known for 2,000 years. Akhenaten declared himself the sole intermediary between the people and this strange new god. A priest? A pharaoh? Try both, with divine hotline access. But where this gets steamy is in the art and poetry that follow. You wander into a sun-drenched chamber with walls covered in sensual carvings, not of battles or conquests, but of domestic life. Akhenaten is shown kissing his wife Nefertiti, nuzzling their children, holding hands beneath the rays of the Aten. These were not stiff, symbolic gestures. They were tender, intimate, public, revolutionary. Egyptian royal art had never shown affection like this. It's like someone dropped a family photo album in the middle of a sacred temple. Now let's talk about Nefertiti. She isn't just arm candy, she's radiant, educated, politically sharp, and possibly one of the most powerful co-rulers Egypt ever saw. Some scholars even argue that she ruled as pharaoh in her own right, either before or after Akhenaten's death. Their bond was unusually public, equal partners basking in the Aten's rays, often mirrored in pose and regalia. You see them depicted with exaggerated sensual grace, curved hips, tilted heads, hands always reaching for one another. It's like watching the first royal couple who actually liked each other. But wait, because there's a twist. Enter Smenkhkare, possibly a younger brother, possibly a son, possibly the same person as Nefertiti in disguise, or maybe none of the above. The records are a mess. But here's what we know. At some point late in Akhenaten's reign, another royal figure appears, male, beautiful and elevated quickly to the status of co-regent. Some depictions show Akhenaten and Smenkhkare side by side in poses strikingly similar to those once reserved for him and Nefertiti. Heads close together, body language intimate, garments nearly identical. There's no hard evidence of a romantic relationship, but the vibes? Strong. Very strong. Even the way Akhenaten is represented begins to blur. He becomes more feminine, softer. His hips widen, his posture curves. And this isn't an isolated case. The entire royal family gets the same treatment. Daughters are shown with elongated skulls and full bellies. The gender binary seems to dissolve under the Aten's rays. Was this religious symbolism, a political experiment, or the visual echo of a ruler exploring identity in ways no other pharaoh dared? Here's your quirky fact. In Akhenaten's new religion, there were no priests, no idols, just sunlight. Worship was conducted through open-air rituals with the king and queen as the exclusive conduits. Imagine inventing an entire religion where you are the only way to reach the divine. Bold, arrogant, maybe genius, definitely lonely. And now the debate. Some modern scholars think Akhenaten might have been intersex or transgender or non-binary, projecting a radical new concept of divine gender. Others argue that the art is symbolic, reflecting the dual nature of creation, male and female in one form. Still others think he just had a pituitary disorder, and everyone overreacted. The truth? Probably a cocktail of all of the above. But what's clear is that Akhenaten wasn't interested in fitting in, sexually, spiritually, or politically. His reign was an act of defiance against centuries of tradition. He changed everything from religious liturgy to sculpture to court fashion, and he did it all under a blazing sun that seemed to strip away secrecy and pretense. Intimacy in his world was not hidden. It was a public act of reverence, a way to commune with the Aten. You walk now through the ruins of Akhenaten. The once bustling city is a ghost. After his death, the backlash was swift. The old gods returned, statues were smashed, names erased. His radical experiment in monotheism and fluid identity was buried, literally and politically, for centuries. It was only rediscovered much later, pieced together from fragments and whispers, like decoding a dream, and still, the vision lingers. Two figures standing in sunlight, hands entwined, children laughing nearby, the rays of a faceless god touching their skin. It's not a scene of conquest, not a declaration of dominance, just connection, sensual, spiritual, strange. Maybe Akhenaten wasn't mad, maybe he was just ahead of his time. By now, you've seen emperors who loved too loudly, too cruelly, too spiritually, but tonight you're about to meet one who turned love into a performance, blood into a spectacle, and sex into an extension of gladiatorial combat. Welcome to the reign of Commodus, you know, the guy from Gladiator. Joaquin Phoenix played him as a whiny psychopath, which honestly isn't far off, but the real Commodus, he was worse and a lot weirder. You're stepping into a Rome where the emperor doesn't just rule the empire, he stars in it, every single night. The palace doors slam behind you with theatrical flair. Everything feels slightly overproduced, like a dinner party directed by a man who thinks he's Jupiter's gift to Earth. You're in the Domus Augustana, but it's not a place of quiet imperial dignity anymore. It's a stage. The marble floors are polished to mirror sheen, the torches cast dramatic shadows, and the furniture seems arranged less for comfort than for dramatic entrances. Commodus is about to make his, and oh he does. He arrives in full gladiator armour, oiled to a mirror shine, wearing nothing underneath but a grin. His favourite opening line, "Am I not generous to grant you my presence?" You try not to roll your eyes. Behind him trail his entourage, wrestlers, actors, perfume boys, and a rotating carousel of lovers. He doesn't care about your gender, your status, or even your willingness. What he wants, he gets. And what he gets, he breaks. But Commodus's sexual life wasn't private, it was theatre. He turned his palace into a live-action coliseum of lust and ego. Guests weren't invited so much as drafted. He'd host banquets, where each course was matched with a new companion. First course, oysters and musicians. Second course, wine and wrestlers. By dessert, he'd disappeared into a side room with someone beautiful and nervous. You never knew if you'd end up with a plate of figs or find yourself the emperor's next experiment. One source tells of Commodus making senators' wives and daughters strip during dinners, parading them around like prize mares. Some say he'd force nobles to sleep with his favourites as entertainment, watching with the same casual interest he showed in watching lions tear criminals apart. Others whisper that he enjoyed dressing in women's clothing during private affairs, or demanding his partners switch roles mid-ritual to confuse, dominate, and destabilise. Whatever the truth, it was always about power, not pleasure. And then there were the gladiators. Commodus didn't just enjoy watching fights, he insisted on joining them. He'd strut into the arena like a peacock with a death wish, wielding a wooden sword while his opponents accidentally tripped and died on cue. Rome played along, cheering him as Hercules reborn, but everyone knew the truth. He wasn't brave, he was bored, and bored emperors are dangerous. But the fights weren't always confined to the sand. He was known to keep his gladiator favourites close, very close. Some were his personal lovers, chosen for their bodies, their scars, their willingness to flatter. These weren't just men with muscles, they were pawns in an erotic game Commodus played to confuse his court. Imagine trying to guess whether your emperor is going to duel you or kiss you, or both. You learn quickly to smile, nod, never make eye contact for too long. Here's your quirky fact. Commodus renamed every month of the Roman calendar after himself, literally. August became Commodus Augustus, September Hercules Invictus, and so on. He renamed Rome itself Colonia Commodiana. When you control time, space, and identity, what's one more body to rename, reshape, repurpose? But there was one woman who seemed to hold his attention longer than most. Marcia. A former slave turned mistress. Marcia was clever, politically savvy, and managed to stay close to Commodus without losing her head, or her clothes too often. She navigated his moods, his delusions, and his erotic unpredictability like a dancer avoiding fire. Some historians even credit her with protecting Christians from persecution and occasionally keeping Commodus from full-on collapse. She was his favourite, his confidant, and eventually his undoing. Because here's where the story turns. After years of excess, years of orgies, executions, and ego worship, Commodus crossed a line. He planned to dress as a gladiator for the Saturnalia, a sacred festival, and lead the ceremonies personally, wielding a sword and demanding sacrifices to himself. Not even his inner circle could spin this one. It wasn't just humiliating, it was dangerous. They were terrified the Roman public would finally snap. Marcia, along with a few trusted allies, poisoned his wine. When the poison failed to kill him fast enough, they sent in his wrestling partner, yes, his own wrestling coach, to strangle him in the bath. It's a fitting end, really. Killed not by a senator or a soldier, but by a man who knew his body better than anyone. One last intimate betrayal. Here's the debate. Was Commodus truly mad, or simply a product of too much power, too young for too long? Some argue he was clinically unstable. Others say he played a role, an exaggerated version of himself, to maintain control. After all, if everyone's terrified, no one's plotting. Until they are. You step out into the early morning air, the scent of sweat and perfume still clinging to your clothes. The Colosseum looms in the distance, empty now, echoing with ghosts. Commodus is gone. The empire limps on. But the memory of his reign lingers like a fever dream, gilded, grotesque, and strangely seductive. You've seen emperors use love as propaganda, sex as ritual, devotion as politics. But Commodus, he made it a game, one that everyone had to play, even when the stakes were life and death. Especially then. You'd think the empire might crave a little peace after Commodus turned the imperial bed into a blood-stained stage. Maybe even a philosopher. Someone quiet, disciplined, dignified, someone like Marcus Aurelius. And yes, that's exactly who they got. But don't roll your eyes just yet, because even the Stoic emperor, the man who wrote Meditations by candlelight on the distant battlefields, had a home life far more complicated than his marble statues suggest. You're about to spend the evening in the quiet chambers of a philosopher king, and maybe, just maybe, his very unphilosophical wife. Marcus Aurelius is the kind of emperor who walks slowly through the corridors, nodding politely at servants, quoting Epictetus under his breath, and worrying about the moral decay of the empire, while wearing the same wool cloak for weeks on end. But behind the calm eyes and calm lines of his famous journal, you find a man in an extremely public, extremely complicated marriage. Enter Faustina the Younger, his cousin, his empress, and, depending on which ancient source you believe, either a model of virtue or an absolute scandal in a gold tiara. She's striking, poised, elegant, with that very Roman kind of beauty. Aquiline nose, sculpted hair, and the steely gaze of someone who knows exactly what the Senate whispers about her, and does not care. She bore Marcus at least 13 children, yes, 13, including Commodus, that delightful chaos goblin you just escaped. But more on that family tragedy in a bit. Here's the thing, Faustina had a reputation. The ancient gossip columnists, looking at you, Cassius Dio, whispered about her supposed infidelities, her taste for gladiators, and her tendency to flirt with just about anyone not bolted to a pedestal. There's a rumour, in fact, that Commodus wasn't Marcus's biological son at all, but the child of a gladiator she favoured. Of course, this could be complete slander. Romans love to smear powerful women, but when the stories won't die, you start to wonder where the fire is behind all that sin smoke. You catch a glimpse of her now, lounging at a banquet, her gold-threaded dress shimmering under the lamplight. She's laughing too freely, her hand lingering a moment too long on the shoulder of a young officer. Marcus watches from across the room, not with jealousy, but with the blank inward stare of a man wondering if desire itself is just another test from the universe. Here's where the real contrast emerges. Marcus was a Stoic, not just in public, but in private. Pleasure, to him, was fleeting. Attachment led to suffering. And sex? Distraction. Necessary for procreation, sure, but nothing to get tangled in. He even wrote that when you strip the act of its music, perfumes, and trappings, what remains is the friction of membranes and a convulsion. That's not exactly a sexy love letter. And yet despite these beliefs, or maybe because of them, He remained deeply loyal to Faustina. He never divorced her, never publicly shamed her. When she died, he mourned her sincerely, built statues in her honour, and had her deified. You walk past one of those statues now, tucked into a colonnade draped in marble robes that managed to be both regal and eerily blank. Was it love, duty, or just Marcus being Marcus, accepting life as it is, not as he wished it to be? But let's pause for a moment and give Faustina her due. Even if the rumours are true, even if she did indulge in a little gladiator appreciation on the side, she was also a powerful political figure. She accompanied Marcus on military campaigns, she gave birth in remote forts, she managed affairs at court. Some sources even credit her with keeping morale up among the troops, the kind of morale that may or may not involve imperial flirtation, but morale nonetheless. You overhear a conversation between two senators. They're arguing over whether Marcus turned a blind eye or simply didn't care. One says he was too focused on virtue to bother with gossip. The other thinks he used philosophy as a shield against humiliation. You can't help but wonder yourself, was Marcus the model of serene wisdom, or was he just quietly devastated in a world that expected him to bear it all in silence? Here's your quirky fact. Despite his austere reputation, Marcus had a private taste for actors and mimes. Not for sex, necessarily, though with Roman theatre that line is always blurred, but for their company. He'd invite them to dinner, ask them questions about performance, laughter, and human behaviour. Maybe part of him craved the chaos he outwardly rejected. Maybe Stoicism is less about rejecting desire and more about dancing with it while pretending not to enjoy the music. And then there's Commodus, their most infamous child. The irony is so thick it could suffocate you. Imagine pouring your entire philosophy into raising a virtuous heir, only to end up with a narcissistic gladiator cosplay enthusiast who once tried to rename the months after himself. Marcus must have seen the signs. Commodus's arrogance, his volatility, his love of the stage. But he didn't stop him. He didn't choose another heir. He simply accepted it. The emperor who believed in the rational order of the cosmos left the fate of Rome in the hands of a man who murdered dinner guests for sport. That, perhaps, is the most heartbreaking part. Marcus Aurelius, the most thoughtful of emperors, failed in the one place he tried hardest, his own family. Maybe that's why he clung to Faustina. Rumours and all, she was the only constant in a life of grief and campaigns and stoic endurance. Even if her love was messy, even if it wandered. You step into his study, where meditation still sits on the desk. A few pages are smudged, the ink slightly faded. He wrote it for himself, not for you. Notes to stay calm, to avoid excess, to endure pain, to resist lust. But between the lines, you sense a man trying desperately to stay afloat in a world full of noise, temptations, and loss. He didn't escape desire, he just stared it down, gently, and let it pass. You awaken to the soft flutter of silk and the sound of nightingales in a bamboo grove. The scent of sandalwood trails through the air like a ghost, and you're no longer in Rome, or anywhere close to it. This is the imperial court of Tang Dynasty China, and at the centre of it all is someone history wasn't quite ready for. Empress Wu Zetian. That's right, not an emperor's lover, not a concubine, not a power behind the throne, but the actual throne. The only woman in Chinese history to officially rule as emperor in her own name. And believe me, she didn't get there by playing nice. Wu wasn't born into royalty. She started as a low-ranking concubine under Emperor Taizong, one of many women in a massive harem system so structured it made the Roman ones look like amateur hour. These palaces were filled with rank titles, scheduled bedding days, etiquette books for pillow talk, and enough court intrigue to keep 12 drama writers busy. At first, Wu was just another name in a ledger. A beautiful face among hundreds, but what set her apart wasn't her looks, it was her mind. After Taizong's death, concubines without children were typically sent to a Buddhist convent. Wu should have faded into history in silence and shaved eyebrows. But fate, or more accurately, her sharp political instincts had other plans. Because while in Taizong's court, she'd caught the eye of his son and heir, Emperor Gaozong. When he took the throne, he made the scandalous decision to bring her back from the convent and into his own court as his concubine. Yes, she used to sleep with his father. No, that didn't stop him. This is ancient palace drama turned up to 11. Soon Wu replaced his empress, not through affection alone. There were accusations of manipulation, even murder. One story claims she smothered her own infant daughter and framed the current empress for the crime. It's impossible to verify, but what we do know is this. Wu maneuvered her way to the top through brilliance, boldness, and a strategic use of both softness and steel. By the time she became empress, Gaozong was already fading, sickly, overwhelmed, half-blinded by illness, and Wu stepped into the power vacuum like a queen born in the stars. She ruled with him at first, then for him, then as him, and finally, when he died, she ruled as herself. Her court was decadent, rich in poetry and perfervid in politics. Silk robes flowed like rivers, musicians played under moonlight, scholars, generals, and officials bowed low when she entered a room. But if you think she softened with power, think again. Wu was ruthless with her enemies, especially men who underestimated her, which, at the time, was almost all of them. And then, there were the lovers. You step into a private chamber off the main palace hall. The lights are low, candles flicker against jade walls. Two young men lounge on embroidered cushions, perfectly sculpted, immaculately dressed, and entirely aware of why they've been summoned. These are Wu's favourites, a polite euphemism for the young, beautiful lovers that she kept close for company and pleasure. Their job? Keep her entertained. Their real job? Obey, charm, and stay in favour. Her most famous favourites were the Jiang brothers, Jiang Yishi and Jiang Changzong. Handsome, witty, well-groomed, and very good at not making eye contact unless spoken to. They rose quickly through the ranks, gaining political power as well as sexual access. People accused them of using their influence to meddle in state affairs. Others said they simply knew how to massage the Empress's ego and back muscles in equal measure. Here's your quirky fact. Wu reportedly commissioned special towers within her palace called the Hall of Morning Grace, where her lovers would await their nightly summons. They were bathed, oiled, perfumed, and made to nap so they'd be refreshed when she was ready. In some accounts, they were even delivered to her chambers in cloth sacks, carried by eunuchs like expensive groceries. A little on the theatrical side, but hey, she earned it. But make no mistake, these weren't romantic dalliances. Wu didn't play the delicate damsel. She took what she wanted, emotionally, politically, sexually, and discarded what bored her. Her lovers weren't equals. They were tools. Temporary stars in her orbit. Beautiful boys with carefully rehearsed smiles. When they got too ambitious, she crushed them. When they got too dull, she replaced them. Still, there's something fascinating about this reversal. After so many male emperors collecting harems like rare coins, Wu turns the system on its head. She becomes the collector, and she doesn't apologize for it. In a world where power and sexuality were almost exclusively male domains, she made space for her own pleasure, and did it without blinking. Now, of course, the Confucian moralists hated this. The official records tried to smear her legacy with accusations of excess, promiscuity, and cruelty. They painted her as monstrous, as unmotherly, as unnatural. But underneath that judgment, you can hear the fear. She did what men had always done, and worse, she did it better. The scholarly debate is juicy. Was she truly debauched or just demonized? Were her sexual appetites real, or part of later historical slander designed to undermine her political legacy? Did she fall in love, or simply indulge? Historians argue over the details, but one thing's clear. Wu controlled the narrative, and even centuries of biased scribes couldn't erase her reign. You walk now through her burial site at Qianling, her tomb sealed beneath a great mountain, her stone tablet left intentionally blank. No inscription, no epitaph, just silence. Some say this was her final power move. Let the future decide what to say about her. Others think her successors didn't dare write her legacy down for fear of getting it wrong. Either way, the empress who ruled for nearly 50 years now lies in stillness, the mountain her witness. As you leave the tomb, you feel it, not just her power, but her presence. The silk, the steel, the candlelit nights of whispered names and sudden executions. She wasn't the emperor's lover. She was the lover of emperors, the writer of history, the flame no one could put out. The scent of burning copal rises into the warm night air. You're standing in a city that gleams like a jeweled crown, Tenochtitlan, capital of the Aztec Empire, built on a lake like a floating dream. The moon reflects off the canals, soft drums echo through the temples, and the stone walkways shimmer with crushed obsidian. Here, power isn't whispered behind palace walls. It's worn openly, gilded in feathers and gold. And tonight, at the center of it all, stands Moctezuma II, the last great emperor of the Aztecs, ruler of a world that's about to vanish, but not before giving you a glimpse into a pleasure palace unlike anything you've ever imagined. Forget everything you think you know about Moctezuma. You're not here to see him captured, confused by conquistadors, or tragically misunderstood. You're here earlier, when his rule is absolute, his city thriving, and his court pulsing with the rhythm of life, death, and, yes, seduction. You're ushered past high walls of stone and firelit carvings into the emperor's private paradise, a palace garden called Tezcatzinco. This isn't a backyard, it's an engineered Eden, perched high on a sacred hill with aqueduct-fed waterfalls, terraces of tropical flowers, and sacred bathing pools cut into the rock. It smells like orchids and rainfall. Macaws flash through the trees, and in the shadows, you see them, Moctezuma's lovers, draped in woven cotton, dyed with cochineal red and indigo blue, their arms tattooed with symbols of fertility and power. The emperor maintained a harem of monumental proportions. Some accounts place the number at over 4,000 women, nobles' daughters, foreign princesses, priestesses, courtesans, and dancers. His palace was practically a city within a city, and unlike the cold, rigid rotation systems of other imperial courts, Moctezuma's approach had flair. His women were not just bed companions, they were living art. Each was chosen not only for beauty, but for elegance, voice, movement, and lineage. Being invited into his court was a political and spiritual ascension. You pass through a chamber where women are being prepared, hair perfumed with wild vanilla and mesquite smoke, bodies oiled with sunflower and cacao, skin dusted with crushed mica that makes them glow like starlight. They're not nervous. They've trained for this. For some, it's duty. For others, ambition. To bear the emperor's child is to elevate one's family. To share his bed is to embody the gods, because here, intimacy isn't merely physical, it's sacred. Moctezuma was believed to be a divine figure, a bridge between men and gods. His touch wasn't just erotic, it was cosmic. The empire revolved around blood, fertility, and cycles. Sex was folded into ritual. It wasn't dirty or hidden. It was necessary, even holy. Now here's something you didn't expect. His lovers weren't all women. While less emphasized in official records, Nahua oral traditions and colonial-era accounts hint that Moctezuma may have kept male companions as well, particularly young acolytes or dancers raised within the Calmecac, the elite school for nobles. Sexuality among the Aztecs wasn't rigid. It was structured, yes, governed by class, age, and religious rules, but it had room for fluidity, especially at the top. What mattered most was balance, energy, and ceremony. Here's your quirky fact. Moctezuma was so protective of his private pleasures that he supposedly employed flower guards, elite eunuchs dressed in fragrant garlands who not only kept order within the harem, but also evaluated new arrivals. They decided which women or men were ready to be presented, much like sommeliers of sensuality. If the emperor's mood was wrong, the attendants might gently postpone a scheduled visit, offering the chosen lover a bath in rosewater and another night to prepare. And then there's the food. Oh, the food. Moctezuma's aphrodisiac-filled feasts were legendary. He consumed chili-spiced chocolate from golden goblets, platters of steamed iguana, and rare fruits from the farthest edges of the empire. He was said to have 30 different meals a day, each course more extravagant than the last, and always followed by a round of erotic encounters. Think of it like pre-Columbian tapas with a side of ecstasy. But before you go romanticizing too hard, let's remember the darker edge. The Aztec worldview was built on sacrifice, literal, constant, and sacred. Sex was tied to life, but also to death. Certain festivals involved public rituals of fertility, where couples would copulate in honor of agricultural gods, followed by sacrifices to complete the cycle. And yes, sometimes those chosen for pleasure were also chosen for offering. A night of divine ecstasy, followed by a dawn of divine bloodletting. There's also the fact that not everyone in Moctezuma's palace had a choice. Many women were gifted by regional rulers to maintain political alliances. Some came willingly, others not so much. The line between privilege and imprisonment blurred quickly behind the embroidered curtains of imperial life. Even within the garden's intoxicating beauty, you notice the stillness in some eyes, a kind of trained grace that hints at careful obedience. Then comes the scholarly debate. Was Moctezuma's court truly a site of luxurious love, or was it more like a sensualized prison gilded in divine language? Some historians argue that colonial chroniclers exaggerated the harem's size and decadence to paint Moctezuma as a barbaric oriental despot, fitting their conquest narrative. Others believe these reports are closer to truth than fiction, shaped by a culture that didn't separate the sacred and the sensual the way Europeans did. You walk through the palace one last time. The obsidian floors reflect flickering torchlight. Dancers prepare for the emperor's evening ritual. In the distance, drums begin. Moctezuma enters, not in armour, but in flowing cotton robes, his face painted with turquoise, his eyes half lidded with expectation. He doesn't rush. He never rushes. When your life is divine, time bends to you. As you leave the garden, the moon high above the Valley of Mexico, you realise this place was never just about sex. It was about power made physical, desire shaped into ceremony, and a ruler who tried to cradle the empire in both arms, one filled with flower petals, the other with obsidian. The jungle heat fades. The drums grow distant, and now you're wrapped in the thick canvas of a military tent, somewhere deep in the forests of Central Europe. You can smell the leather of saddles, hear horses snorting just beyond the torchlight, and above it all, the low growl of a man giving orders in Frankish. This is Charlemagne's world, ruler of the Carolingian Empire, crowned emperor of the Romans in the year 800, and somehow, despite all that holy business, a man whose knights were anything but chaste. Tonight, you're invited into the emperor's war tent, not to fight, but to watch him turn the conquest into courtship. Let's be clear, Charlemagne was not a subtle man. He was tall, imposing, famously bearded, and carried himself like someone convinced the Pope himself existed to give him crowns and compliments. But beneath the religious rhetoric and reformist policies, there was also a man with, let's call them, firm appetites. He wasn't Caligula-level wild, but he had his own methods. He didn't throw orgies. He preferred rotation. You find yourself seated beside a low fire, watching as women, dozens of them, move in and out of the imperial tent in carefully timed intervals. These aren't random tavern girls, they're noble women, hostages, widows, abbesses, turn-and companions, and more than a few forcibly gifted to him by regional lords, hoping to curry favour. A whispered name echoes round the camp. La Parade. That's what they call it. The nightly procession. Not official policy, of course. Charlemagne was a deeply Christian man in public, but everyone knows how it works. One woman enters, another leaves, the guards bow, the candle stays lit. He married multiple times, but didn't let that stop him from fathering at least 18 children, some say more, with a colourful roster of wives, concubines, and trusted companions. One favourite was Hildegard of Windsgau, a teenager when they married, who bore him 9 children before dying at 25. Another, Fastrada, held his attention so tightly that his court accused her of manipulating the king with potions, and possibly witchcraft. You know, the usual accusation when a woman shows too much influence in a room full of anxious men. But the real story, the intimate one, is how Charlemagne treated these women. He wasn't known for cruelty or detachment. Quite the opposite, he kept them close, sometimes too close. Even after their relationships cooled or became politically inconvenient, he continued to support them, house them, even visit them. His daughters too remained at court long after reaching adulthood, unmarried but not untouched. Many had lovers, many bore children, and many scholars believe Charlemagne encouraged this arrangement, because a married daughter was a political liability, a daughter at court, a controllable one. You watch him now, laughing beside one of those daughters. The firelight softens his face. He touches her hand, gently, fatherly, but maybe too familiar. She smiles back with the easy confidence of someone who knows she won't be married off to some dusty duke. Some say Charlemagne's protectiveness bordered on possessive. Others hint at darker implications. There's no hard evidence of incest, but the closeness, the intensity, raises eyebrows across centuries. Here's your quirky fact. Despite his reputation for piety, Charlemagne was reportedly obsessed with bathing. He took hot baths almost daily and insisted his women, wives, daughters, lovers join him. These weren't just hygiene rituals, They were social events, semi-private, filled with laughter, music, and the occasional suggestive splash. Not quite Roman decadence, but certainly not Benedictine austerity either. So what did the church think? Officially, they squirmed. The Carolingian Renaissance, which Charlemagne spearheaded, was meant to revive Christian learning and values. His court was full of monks, scholars, and bishops, none of whom were thrilled about the imperial harem tucked behind the chapel. Alcuin of York, one of his closest advisors, often wrote him polite but unmistakably disapproving letters about the dangers of carnal indulgence. Charlemagne replied usually by doing exactly what he wanted. But there was more than lust at play. Every lover, every child was a strand in the web of loyalty he spun across Europe. His lovers' families became allies. Their sons became nobles, their daughters abbesses or court ladies, even the illegitimate ones, especially the illegitimate ones. In Charlemagne's world, power flowed from his loins as much as from his sword. Now comes the scholarly debate. Was Charlemagne's romantic behaviour scandalous by medieval standards or just expected? After all, medieval kings weren't monks. Most had mistresses, most fathered illegitimate children, but few did it with quite so much organisation. Some historians argue that he saw sex as diplomacy. Others suggest he simply didn't believe celibacy applied to him. When you're crowned by the Pope himself, maybe you stop asking for permission. Still, despite all the lovers, Charlemagne never remarried after the death of his last wife, Luitgard. He was around 50 then, and while the lovers kept rotating, something shifted. He aged, he softened, he took more walks alone. His nightly parade slowed to a shuffle. In his final years, he spent more time with monks and manuscripts than maidens. You stand beside his tomb now, deep in the cathedral at Aachen. He's buried in a seated position, surrounded by relics, his hands on his knees as if still judging the world from beyond. No one knows where all the women went. Their names are scattered through chronicles, sometimes just initials, sometimes not even that. But their children built Europe. Their whispers, their presence, their warmth. They ripple through time, soft echoes under heavy crowns. So yes, Charlemagne prayed. And yes, he studied. And yes, he wrote laws, ruled empires, and was declared a saint by some hopeful historians. But at night, he was a man with a schedule, a candle, and a list of names read softly in the dark. You don't even need the date to know you've arrived in the world of Ivan IV, the moment the cold hits your skin like a slap from a jealous ghost, you know. This is Russia in the 16th century. Snow falls in soft, hypnotic silence, and yet the air feels dangerous, brittle, ready to crack. The Kremlin looms ahead, all jagged onion domes and watchful towers, like it's waiting to pounce. Tonight, you're not just a guest in Tsar Ivan's palace, you're an observer to one of the most famously twisted love lives in history. And if you think he earned the nickname Ivan the Terrible, purely for politics, you're in for a long, uncomfortable ride. He was married 8 times, or maybe 7, depending on which poisoned corpse you count. But this wasn't a man who loved and lost. This was a man who loved like a war campaign, aggressively, possessively, and with zero tolerance for betrayal, imagined or real. Let's begin with his first and most famous wife, Anastasia Romanovna. She was young, noble, and one of the rare figures in Ivan's life who seemed to calm him. Historical accounts say that during their 13 years of marriage, Ivan was tolerable. Less murder, fewer public breakdowns, fewer boyars tossed into rivers for minor slights. But when she died, suddenly, mysteriously, he snapped. Poison, he claimed. Treachery. And from that point forward, every woman in his life was measured against the ghost of Anastasia. Spoiler, none of them measured up. You're walking through one of his lesser-known palaces now, a place he built not for grandeur, but for seclusion. The hallways are lined with tapestries, but the designs aren't floral, they're scenes of biblical judgment. Fire, wrath, rebirth through punishment. It's less of a home, more of a theological panic attack. And tucked inside these rooms, the women, silent, guarded, watched. Each new wife was a mixture of political manoeuvring and emotional desperation. There's Maria Temryukovna, a Circassian princess whom Ivan married shortly after Anastasia's death. She was beautiful, exotic, and completely unsuited for court life. She barely spoke Russian and was deeply unpopular with both nobles and commoners. Ivan, convinced she was a replacement for his lost angel, smothered her with attention. When she failed to be Anastasia 2.0, he turned on her. She died young, poisoned, some say, perhaps with Ivan's approval, or perhaps just by the paranoia that clung to everything he touched. His third wife died of illness. Fourth, drowned by Ivan himself in a fit of rage. Fifth, exiled to a convent. Sixth, accused of plotting, exiled again. Seventh, the pattern continues. You notice that Ivan liked to alternate between marrying out of love and marrying out of politics, but the results were always the same: disillusionment, destruction, and a quiet walk to a monastery or a grave. Then there's the infamous eighth wife, Maria Nagaya. She bore Ivan a son, Dmitri, but her fate would be just as tragic. After Ivan's death, her child died mysteriously or was assassinated, and she ended her days as a nun, watching imposters later rise claiming to be her dead son. It's like a Russian novel with too many endings. Now let's talk about that moment, the one historians still shudder over. Ivan, mid-rage, strikes his son and heir, also named Ivan, in the head with a staff. The boy dies. The father breaks down. There's a painting of this scene by Ilya Repin, and you might have seen it. Ivan cradling his son's bleeding head, eyes wide with horror, mouth twisted in a scream, too late to matter. It's both personal and political, because in that moment, Ivan doesn't just kill his son, he kills his future. The Romanovs will eventually rise, but Ivan's line, it ends in silence. Here's your quirky fact. Ivan reportedly created a bride show, a sort of just twisted beauty pageant meets forced royal tinder. Hundreds of noble families were invited to present their daughters for inspection. The criteria: beauty, health, and total submission. The chosen girl would be whisked away to a palace, isolated, and groomed, literally and figuratively, for imperial consumption. It sounds like a fairy tale until you realise most of these girls were teenagers, and failure to please the Tsar could mean exile or worse. Still, there's a strange kind of longing threaded through Ivan's cruelty. He wanted love, real love, but his power made that impossible. You can't love someone you don't trust, and Ivan trusted no one. Not his wives, not his children, not his court. Everyone was a threat. Everyone a test. Even in intimacy, he was performing dominance. Sex wasn't about closeness. It was about control. Marriage wasn't companionship, it was conquest. And the scholarly debate, some argue Ivan was mad. That the trauma of childhood, watching his family murdered, living in isolation among scheming nobles, fractured something in him permanently. Others say he was entirely sane, just raised in a pressure cooker of absolute power and no boundaries. His love life, then, becomes a case study in what happens when romantic obsession, religious guilt, and unchecked authority swirl together inside a brilliant, unstable man. You find yourself back in his chapel now, the walls are covered in icons, and the air is heavy with incense and regret. Ivan's final days were quiet, and he died while playing chess, though even that has been wrapped in conspiracy theories. Poison, again, or maybe just the weight of his own sins finally pulling him down. As you leave the palace, snow crunching underfoot, you glance back and see shadows in the windows, women long forgotten, wives whose names never made it into history books, lovers who lived and died by the rhythm of Ivan's moods. Their stories are written not in poems or statues, but in the silence between records, in the blank spaces where no one dared to write what really happened, even the terrible. Tsar of Russia, lover of many, cherisher of none, and in the end, most terrible to himself. You blink, and the chill of Russia vanishes in a rush of velvet, candlelight, and powdered wigs. The air is thick with perfume and powdered faces, and your feet rest on a floor polished so obsessively that you can see the rococo ceiling reflected beneath you. Welcome to Versailles, where even seduction is choreographed, and the Emperor of Indulgence himself, Louis XIV, is reclining in a bed so ornate it might actually deserve its own title and land grant. This isn't just any bed. This is le lit de justice, the bed of state where politics and pleasure sleep head to head. The Sun King, they called him, Louis Dieudonné, God-given, the man who made himself the centre of the French universe and made absolutely sure you didn't forget it. He ruled longer than any monarch in European history, 72 years, and during that time he mastered the art of ruling by spectacle. Every move, every word, every whisper in the court was designed for effect, and nowhere was that more true than in his bedroom. You arrive just in time for la levée, the king's daily waking ritual, And no, this wasn't some private, bleary-eyed stretch and yawn. This was a full-blown ceremony. Courtiers lined up to watch Louis get out of bed. One official handed him his slippers, another held the mirror. Others just stood there and admired. It was like a reality show without the editing. And yes, he got dressed in front of people, on purpose, because nothing says absolute monarch like making a dozen nobles wake up at dawn just to watch you tie your garters. But behind all the grandeur, there was a pulsing undercurrent of physicality. Louis wasn't shy about desire. His love life reads like a soap opera written by someone with access to very expensive lace. His official queen was Maria Theresa of Spain, a sweet, devout woman who gave him 6 children and tolerated his endless infidelities with the quiet agony of someone who knew her role was to smile and endure. But the real heat? That came from his mistresses. And oh, the mistresses. The official ones were given titles, rooms, jewels, and often their own private wings in the palace. First came Louise de la Vallière, young, quiet, painfully in love. She was the innocent, the gentle soul who fell hard and fast, only to be replaced once she became too weepy and inconvenient. She ended her life in a convent. Classic. Then came Madame de Montespan, the opposite in every way. Witty, ambitious, political, she wasn't just a lover. She was a power player. For years, she was the maîtresse en titre, the official royal mistress, and she wielded more influence than most ministers. She bore him 7 children. She hosted salons, she oversaw royal architecture. And yes, she slept in a chamber directly connected to his, because convenience is key when your lover is the king. You watch them now, sipping wine under a golden canopy, their fingers entwined beneath the table. But there's always tension. Rumours swirl. Montespan was accused of dabbling in black magic and even participating in the infamous Affair of the Poisons, a scandal involving aristocrats, witches, and whispered sacrifices. Whether she truly hired sorcerers or was simply the victim of court intrigue, we'll never know. But eventually, even she lost her lustre. Enter Madame de Maintenon, older, pious, composed. She didn't seduce with cleavage or scandal, but with calm and conversation. After years of drama, Louis fell for her quiet dignity, and in a move that shocked the court, he married her, secretly. She was never crowned, never acknowledged officially, but everyone knew. The king had chosen peace over passion, and by then perhaps that was the most erotic thing of all. Here's your quirky fact. Louis had a hidden staircase built into Versailles, so he could slip between the Queen's chamber, his own, and his mistress's rooms without being seen by courtiers. It was known as the King's Secret Path. Imagine Versailles as a 3-dimensional chessboard of bedrooms, with the king moving across it like a very determined knight. And yes, he aged. The glamour faded, his teeth rotted, his breath soured, the wigs got heavier. But the rituals never stopped. Even when he was sick, the levee continued. The mistresses kept their titles, the gossip never died. Louis understood that monarchy was performance, and love. Love was just another act, sometimes whispered behind fans, sometimes screamed in candlelit halls, always watched. There's debate among historians about how much of Louis's passion was real and how much was calculated. Did he fall in love, or just find new tools to wield power? Was Montespan a true partner, or just a political convenience with good bone structure? Did Maintenon calm his soul, or simply bore him into compliance? The truth, as always, lies in the blur. And what of those who circled outside the spotlight? The noblewomen who offered themselves in exchange for influence? The pages, the musicians, the stable boys? Yes, there were rumours about them too. Versailles was a court of masks, and behind every mask was someone trying to survive. Some with their words, some with their bodies. You walk now through the Hall of Mirrors alone. The chandeliers cast fragmented reflections, dozens of Louis faces smiling back. The palace is quiet, but the air still hums with secrets. Somewhere beneath your feet, the hidden staircase still waits. The beds are empty, but the echo of whispered names, Louise, Athénaïs, Françoise, still lingers like perfume in the velvet. Louis XIV turned love into statecraft. He wielded lust like a sceptre, making it regal, ritualized, and faintly ridiculous. But somewhere in those long candle-lit nights, between the court formalities and the whispered confessions, there must have been a flicker of something real. A touch not for politics, a look not for the audience. A brief human moment in a palace built for gods. The marble fades, the powdered wigs vanish. Now the cold bites again. But this time it's Russian, and it doesn't flirt. It slaps. The kind of cold that crystallizes breath and turns royal pearls brittle on the skin. You're stepping into the court of Catherine II, better known as Catherine the Great. The title's not just honorary. This woman ruled the largest empire on earth, launched cultural revolutions, expanded borders, and, yes, collected lovers the way others collected Fabergé eggs, carefully, decisively, and with a clear eye for detail. You arrive in the Winter Palace under moonlight, the snow outside glowing blue, inside it's warm, golden, hushed. Not with silence. Catherine's court is never silent, but with anticipation. A masked ball is unfolding, the air thick with powdered perfume and the rustle of brocade. You catch sight of her across the room, tall, composed, eyes like polished steel under a powdered wig. This is a woman who reads philosophy before breakfast and rewrites European power structures between dinner and dessert. And tonight, she's shopping for a new favourite. Let's clarify that term, favourite. In Catherine's court, this wasn't a casual fling or a late-night drunk text. Her favourites were carefully vetted, hand-picked, interviewed, groomed, tested, promoted. The job description included political discretion, physical stamina, conversational charm, and unwavering loyalty. The payoff? Enormous. Titles, estates, pensions, access. Not bad for what was essentially an imperial boyfriend contract with perks and a possible retirement package. Take Grigory Orlov, one of the most famous. He wasn't just a lover, he was part of the coup that put her on the throne. Muscle, charisma, a hint of danger. He fathered her illegitimate child and was rewarded with enormous wealth. But when he grew arrogant, sloppy, and too interested in other women, Catherine quietly replaced him. Enter Grigory Potemkin, possibly the greatest love of her life. Their connection was deep, intellectual, strategic, possibly even spiritual. They may have married secretly. Their letters are filled with longing, wordplay, and emotional vulnerability that few rulers ever dared commit to paper. Potemkin was more than a favourite. He was her partner, architect of her military successes, mastermind behind the Crimean annexation. After their romantic affair cooled, he still remained at her side, an advisor, co-ruler, co-conspirator. They built an empire together. She called him my dearest friend and signed her letters yours to the grave. If that's not romantic in the most imperial Russian way possible, what is? But even while Potemkin remained in her orbit, Catherine continued to take younger lovers, men decades her junior, often soldiers or minor nobles. That's when the vetting system became more official. According to accounts, Potemkin personally helped her select and prepare these young men. Imagine your ex-boyfriend managing your dating app swipes. Only instead of Tinder, it's palace operatives filing physical reports. Age, education, muscle tone, teeth condition, conversational ability, artistic taste. And here's your quirky fact. Catherine had a private chamber known as her boudoir secret, where she displayed erotic art and porcelain, custom pieces featuring suggestive, mythological, and frankly eyebrow-raising imagery. These were not publicly shown, they were part of her personal private world, shared only with the most trusted. It was her retreat, her quiet rebellion against the stifling propriety of court life, and a reminder that sex wasn't a scandal. It was a pleasure, a power, a language. Of course, history hasn't been kind, or rather it's been way too eager. The most persistent and entirely false rumour about Catherine involves a horse. You've heard it. Don't act like you haven't. It's one of the most infamous slanders in royal history, concocted by enemies and spread by those uncomfortable with a woman exercising sexual freedom and political dominance. The truth? There's zero evidence, not even a scrap. The lie survives only because people find it easier to mock powerful women than to understand them. What's real is far more interesting. Catherine took control of her image as much as her empire. She had portraits commissioned that radiated maternal benevolence and imperial grandeur, often downplaying her femininity in favour of authority. But privately, in letters and journals, she was tender, witty, occasionally self-deprecating, and deeply sensual. She loved poetry. She adored flattery. She once wrote that the worst thing about growing older was losing the power to enchant. But enchant she did, over and over. Some favourites lasted weeks, others years. Some she supported for life, some she dismissed with grace, a few tried to linger too long. One or two ended in exile. She wasn't cruel, just decisive. When a favourite outlived his use or appeal, he was thanked, rewarded, and gently removed from the palace rotation. It was never personal. It was policy. And here's the scholarly debate. Was Catherine's parade of lovers a sign of libertinism, loneliness, or power strategy? Some argue she craved affection after a loveless marriage and brutal early court life. Others say her romances were extensions of diplomatic flexibility, a way to bind nobles to her through desire and reward. Some even argue she was crafting a feminist counter-narrative, a woman who refused to be defined by male approval, yet skillfully wielded it when she chose. You step now into her study. The walls are lined with books, Voltaire, Diderot, Plato. The Empress wrote plays, policies, and philosophical treatises by candlelight while her favourites slept in the next room. She once hosted a dinner for foreign ambassadors with a lover's arm around her waist and a quill in the other hand. Power and passion were not separate from her. They were partners. When Catherine died in 1796, she left behind more than an empire. She left an idea that a woman could rule not just through dynasty, but through intellect, wit, and yes, desire. Her lovers came and went. Her policies endured. Her portraits still stare out from museum walls, eyes gleaming, mouth curled in the faintest smile, as if she knows something you don't. As you leave the palace, snow crunching beneath your boots, you pass a portrait of her in coronation robes, one hand resting lightly on a scepter, the other on her heart. And for a moment you wonder if it was ever lonely, being the most powerful woman in the world. Or if, in the quiet between love affairs and legislative sessions, she simply smiled, wrote another page, and rang the bell for her next appointment. The snow melts, the vodka fades, the candles go out. Now you're walking through a palace of polished marble, where gold gleams under intricate domes and jasmine perfumes the air with subtle insistence. You're no longer in the cold shadows of the north. You've arrived in the heart of the Ottoman Empire, and the man you're here to meet is Suleiman the Magnificent, lawgiver, conqueror, poet, and perhaps the most unexpectedly romantic sultan in 1,000 years of imperial intrigue. Tonight, you're stepping into the Topkapi Palace, into the silk-lined halls of the imperial harem, and into the strangest thing of all, a love story that shook the foundations of an empire built on desire. Let's set the scene. The harem isn't a debauched pit of orgies like your Western textbooks might have implied. It's a heavily guarded, hierarchical society of elite women, mothers, daughters, wives, concubines, trained in the arts, languages, politics, music, and survival. Entering the harem wasn't punishment, it was potential, and for one woman it became history. Her name? Hurrem. Though you might know her as Roxolana, the nickname Europeans gave her because she came from Ruthenia, modern-day Ukraine. She was captured in a Tatar raid, enslaved, and eventually brought to the Topkapi Palace, where thousands of girls like her were trained as potential concubines. But Hurrem didn't just survive the system, she rewrote it. You see her now gliding across the tiled corridor in amber silk. She's not the most beautiful woman in the room, but her eyes are fire, and her laughter, Roxolana means the cheerful one, is somehow more dangerous than daggers. When she meets Suleiman, the chemistry is instant. It's not just sex, though there's plenty of that. It's wit, intelligence, challenge. She teases him, debates him, mocks his poetry, and he listens, not just with his ears, with his empire. At first, she's just another concubine, then his favourite, then the mother of his son, but that still isn't enough. Hurrem doesn't want a temporary crown, she wants permanence, and against every tradition of the Ottoman harem, Suleiman marries her, publicly, officially, scandalously. No sultan had done that in centuries. Concubines bore heirs, wives were for politics. Hurrem somehow became both. You walk with her through the harem's private chambers, tilework so intricate it hums with hidden messages, domed ceilings painted with stars. This is her domain now, not just as lover, but as Valida Sultan, mother of the heir, advisor to the throne, diplomat in silk. She writes letters to foreign kings and she gives alms to the poor, she builds mosques, she opens schools. But make no mistake, she plays the long game. And the game is deadly. Because in the Ottoman system, sons of the Sultan weren't just heirs, they were potential threats. When one became Sultan, the others were removed, permanently. So Hurrem had to ensure her son Selim was the last one standing. And that meant navigating the terrifying waters of palace politics, where assassination notes were passed like love letters, and one misstep meant a sudden accident in a bathhouse. Her biggest rival, Mahidevran, another consort and the mother of Suleiman's eldest son, Mustafa. Mustafa was beloved, competent, and likely to inherit. But Hurrem knew better than to wait and see. She whispered. She manoeuvred. And in the end, Suleiman had Mustafa executed, by strangulation with a silk cord, the Ottoman way of keeping royal blood off the floor. The palace trembled. The people wept. Hurrem remained. Now here's your quirky fact. Suleiman didn't just rule. He wrote poetry under the pen name Muhibbi, meaning the lover. And many of his poems were addressed to Hurrem, passionate, aching spiritual verse describing her as his spring, his candle, his soul's companion. She wrote back. Their letters are preserved, fragments of one of history's most powerful, sensual, pen-pal romances. My Sultan, she writes, every moment away from you is like 1,000 deaths. No emoji needed, but scholars still argue. Was it love or manipulation? Did Hurrem truly care for Suleiman, or was she a genius of political seduction, using affection as a weapon sharper than any scimitar? Some say she was the ultimate survivor. Others say she softened the empire with charity and counsel. Still others think the truth is simpler, that they were two powerful people who, against all odds, fell madly in love. You step now into the Suleymaniye Mosque, Suleiman's final architectural legacy, built to echo his empire's perfection. Hurrem has her own tomb nearby, her name carved in elegant Arabic calligraphy, bathed in soft light. They were buried close together, unheard of for a concubine, unthinkable for a slave girl, but perfectly normal for a queen. And as you pass between the tombs, you feel something strange in the air, not just power, not just lust, but something gentler, riskier, realer. A man who conquered half the Mediterranean built monuments for a woman who once entered his life in chains, and instead of breaking her, he let her rise. Or maybe she simply refused to stay kneeling. As you leave the palace, you glance back at the domes of the harem silhouetted against the night sky. Love in this world wasn't red roses and long walks. It was letters folded with trembling hands, choices made in shadow, suns buried with silk, and a ruler's heart split between duty and desire. Suleiman and Hurrem didn't rewrite the rules. They burned them, then etched their story into stone. You're standing in the dim glow of candlelight, surrounded by scrolls, quills, and half-drunk goblets of red wine. There's a fire crackling in the hearth, and a short, wiry man hunched over a desk, scribbling furiously. His coat is unbuttoned. His boots are still dusty, and he's muttering to himself in French. That's when it hits you. You're in Napoleon's tent, somewhere between a battlefield and a bedroom. And tonight, instead of manoeuvring armies, he's pouring out a different kind of strategy. One involving lust, longing, and a whole lot of obsessive energy. Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, military genius, self-made monarch, master of artillery, and, as it turns out, deeply needy in the romance department. He didn't just write love letters, he wrote love letters. Passionate, clumsy, weirdly smelly ones. He wrote them like a man who thought he could conquer affection the same way he conquered kingdoms, by sheer force of will, constant attack, and an alarming number of metaphors. His first great love, of course, was Josephine de Beauharnais, and older than him by 6 years, elegant, sensual, and very much already involved in high society Parisian affairs when they met. She was everything he wasn't, refined, connected, and cool under pressure. When the Fee married in 1796, he was a general with a sharp jaw and sharper ambition. She wore the ring, he wrote the letters. You peek over his shoulder at one of them now, and it's intense. I wake filled with thoughts of you, he writes. Your portrait and the intoxicating evening I spent with you have left my senses in turmoil. Lovely, right? And then just a few lines later, I want you naked and smell less. Classic Napoleon, romantic and gross in the same breath. He wanted her body, her loyalty, her everything. Unfortunately, Josephine was less enthused. While Napoleon was off winning Italy, Josephine was back in Paris, having affairs. Elegant ones, discreet ones, but still affairs. When the rumours reached him, he imploded. He threatened, begged, accused, and continued to write letters at an alarming rate. His obsession wasn't just sexual, it was existential. He didn't just want her fidelity, he wanted to be the only thought in her mind. And that's a hard thing to guarantee when you're married to someone with a better social calendar than yours. Still, they stayed married for years, through coups, campaigns, and coronations. When Napoleon crowned himself emperor in 1804, literally placing the crown on his own head in Notre Dame, Josephine sat beside him as empress, but the cracks were deepening. Josephine couldn't give him what he wanted most, an heir. And that's where it all unravelled. You're in the palace now, Tuileries or Fontainebleau, it doesn't matter. And the conversation is hushed but brutal. Napoleon tells her it's over, politely, tearfully, but still over. She pleads, he cries. They both know it's political necessity. And in a tragic twist, he divorces the woman he still loved so he can marry someone younger, fertile and thoroughly Austrian, Marie-Louise, daughter of the Emperor of Austria and political chess piece extraordinaire. Here's your quirky fact. Napoleon demanded that Josephine continue to write him even after the divorce, and she did. They exchanged letters, he sent her gifts, he called her the only woman he ever loved. When she died in 1814, he was devastated. Years later, in exile on St. Helena, he kept a locket with her portrait and a clipping of her hair. He'd lie in bed, broken, defeated, whispering her name, not Marie-Louise's, Josephine's. But don't feel too sorry for him just yet, because between Josephine and exile, Napoleon had more than his fair share of other lovers, mistresses both casual and official. Among them was Maria Walewska, a Polish countess who bore him a child and adored him with full tragic flair. Unlike Josephine, Walewska was young, starry-eyed, and saw Napoleon as a symbol of national hope. For him, she was convenient, sweet, disposable. There were other affairs, quick flings during campaigns, soldiers' wives, maids, actresses. Napoleon was reportedly less concerned with charm and more concerned with availability. He wasn't elegant about it. He didn't seduce, he acquired. The same intensity he brought to war, he brought to desire, which is to say, a lot, too much, probably exhausting for everyone involved. And yet, there's something undeniably human in it. For all his ego, Napoleon wanted love. Deep down, he was terrified of irrelevance, of being forgotten. Sex wasn't just pleasure. It was proof that he mattered, that he could still command more than armies. His marriages were politics, his mistresses were therapy. But Josephine, she was the one he couldn't conquer. Historians still debate how much of his obsession with her was real affection and how much was wrapped up in control, projection, and unmet expectations. Was he a romantic, a narcissist, a tragic fool? Maybe all of the above. His letters, his policies, his entire personality scream a man trying to outpace his own insecurity with sheer volume. You walk now through the gardens of Malmaison, Josephine's estate. Bought by Napoleon, adored by her. The roses still bloom. The air is soft. And in the distance you imagine him riding toward her, fresh off a battlefield, letters in his pocket, sweat on his brow, heart too full of things he doesn't quite understand. Because in the end, Napoleon could map out a campaign with surgical precision. But love, that battlefield broke him. Now you feel velvet again. But not the French kind, perfumed and powdered. This is Ethiopian velvet, deep, dark, heavy with history. It smells like incense and old rain. You're in Addis Ababa, but the year is 1930, and the empire is at a strange crossroads, both ancient and new, sacred and modernizing. The man stepping into the light wears a ceremonial crown, robes trimmed in gold, and the weight of 1,000 years on his shoulders. He is Haile Selassie I, the Lion of Judah, elect of God, Emperor of Ethiopia. And tonight, we're not just exploring his court, his politics, or his defiant resistance to colonialism. We're entering the quiet, complex world of his private life where discipline met desire under the watchful eye of the divine. To the outside world, Haile Selassie was the image of moral authority. A devout Ethiopian Orthodox Christian, he projected a carefully cultivated image of royal restraint, dignity, and incorruptible virtue. No mistresses on parade, no sex scandals in the press, no embroidered silk bedsheets with golden initials. Compared to the emperors you've met so far, Selassie seems like a monk, buttoned up, soft-spoken, touched by lust. But look closer. You walk through the Menelik Palace at twilight, the stone halls glowing orange in the setting sun. The place is quiet, almost reverent, but you can feel the tension, unspoken, disciplined, carefully wrapped in protocol. The emperor's wife, Empress Menenasfau, walks the gardens in a white Nutella shawl, a woman of grace, silence, and immense political savvy. She bore him 6 children, stood beside him during war and exile, and kept the court stitched together like the hem of her linen robes. Their marriage, unquestioned. Their bond, strong. Their love, quiet but unmistakable. Still, the rumours came, among them whispers of discreet relationships veiled in secrecy, often involving noble women and court attendants. It was never scandalous, never blatant. No favourites promoted, no titles given in exchange for affection. Haile Selassie had no Versailles, no Topkapi. But in a palace built on silence, desire didn't vanish, it learned to whisper. There were stories of long conversations held in private salons, notes passed with poetic phrasing, occasional transfers of ladies-in-waiting to other regions, always justified by logistics, never by emotion. The emperor maintained the surface of virtue with the precision of a man who understood the world was watching. Here's your quirky fact. Selassie never travelled with his wife. On official state visits to Europe, the US, and Asia, he often travelled alone, or with a tightly controlled entourage. Some say this was political pragmatism. Others suggest it left room for certain quiet arrangements abroad. His dignity never faltered, but stories of European countesses charmed by the soft-spoken emperor and elegant dinners that slipped into lingering hotel visits made their rounds in diplomatic circles. And back home, even more subtle. Ethiopia was a society deeply rooted in both Orthodox Christianity and ancient imperial tradition. Any whisper of impropriety could ignite tension between the monarchy and the clergy. So if Selassie did indulge, it was never with pomp. No rotating lovers, no love poems etched into palace walls, just brief, complex connections hidden under a lifetime of controlled expression. There's a moment you witness that explains it all. Late one evening, Selassie walks alone in the palace chapel. He lights a single candle and bows his head. The priest has left. The icons stare back at him with blank, holy eyes. You see him hesitate, hand over his heart. There's guilt in that gesture, or maybe grief, the pressure of being not just a man, but a symbol. When you're considered the literal descendant of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, your body doesn't belong entirely to you anymore, and that's the scholarly debate. Was Haile Selassie as chaste as history suggests, or was he simply better at keeping the public and the private neatly separated? Some argue he modelled his personal life after the Christian monarchs of old: discipline, duty, restraint. Others believe that his power, like every ruler's, came with quiet indulgences. They just weren't recorded. Not because they didn't happen, but because in his court what wasn't spoken didn't exist. Even his closest advisors rarely commented. His diaries were sanitized. His letters, careful. His enemies accused him of corruption, but never licentiousness. That wasn't his weapon. His seduction wasn't sensual, it was spiritual. He ruled hearts, not hips. He enchanted with wisdom, not wit. Women admired him not for grand gestures, but for the way he listened. How he carried Serenum like a crown. And yet the silence is loud. You walk now through the imperial archives where documents lie preserved in script both ancient and elegant. A letter surfaces, anonymous, a woman's hand flowing and steady. "My lord," she writes, "I have never been so close to holiness, nor so far from myself." No signature, no reply, but someone saved it. Outside, the stars begin to rise over the hills of Addis. The palace is still, and you start to realise that not all imperial passions explode in opera. Some flicker, some wait, some live and die in a glance held a second too long, a hand touched beneath a scroll, a kiss imagined but never given. Haile Selassie was no hedonist, but he was human, and beneath the robes and titles and divine heritage, he carried his longings the way emperors like him always did, with discretion, with discipline, and with the quiet ache of someone who had to choose legacy over love. You wake up to salt on your skin and the distant hiss of waves on volcanic rock. The air is soft, humid, touched by plumeria, and you're surrounded by high cliffs and sweeping green valleys. This isn't a palace in the European sense, no stone towers, no marble statues, but make no mistake, you're in the court of a king. Welcome to the Hawaiian kingdom in its earliest form, and tonight you're standing at the side of Kamehameha the Great, the warrior chief who unified the islands and whose romantic life was as expansive, layered and rooted in tradition as the lava fields beneath your feet. He doesn't sit on a golden throne, he stands on a woven mat, bare-chested, garlanded with mail and kukui leaves, the royal feathered cloak draped across his shoulders. His face is carved in stone and serenity, but his eyes watch everything. This is a man of war, yes, but also a man of deep feeling. And in this world, intimacy doesn't just serve pleasure. It binds lineages, secures power, honours gods, and reflects the mana, or spiritual energy, of the chief himself. And Kamehameha had a lot of mana. His love life was rooted not in conquest but in custom, specifically the traditions of Ali'i-class polyamory, where high-ranking chiefs and chiefesses engaged in multiple simultaneous romantic and sexual relationships, often arranged for religious, political and genealogical purposes. The idea of monogamy? Foreign. Imported? Limiting. The idea here was to connect bloodlines, elevate status, and strengthen alliances through affection as much as through arms. You stand beside a thatched hail overlooking the ocean, where several of Kamehameha's wives are gathered. They are not rivals, they're partners in governance, mothers of heirs, stewards of sacred knowledge. Each one holds a different role. Some are close confidants, others, political matches, the most famous among them. Ka'ahumanu, a towering figure in her own right, intelligent, commanding, and destined to become Kuhina Nui, essentially co-ruler of the kingdom after Kamehameha's death. But their relationship wasn't exactly a storybook romance. When he first pursued her, she resisted fiercely. She didn't want to be just another consort. She wanted authority, and he, recognizing her strength, gave it to her, eventually making her one of his most influential wives. She helped him rule, advised him on strategy, and after his death, she tore through the islands with her own political reforms, including the dismantling of the old kapu system, the strict religious code that governed gender, sex, and food. Now here's your quirky fact. One of the most sacred taboos under that kapu system was the separation of men and women during meals. Men could not eat with women, and certain foods were forbidden to women entirely. The logic? Complex, spiritual, cosmic. But Ka'ahumanu, after Kamehameha's death, broke that rule publicly, sitting down beside male chiefs and consuming sacred foods, effectively shattering centuries of law. That rebellion had its roots in her marriage, where she had long pressed against the borders of tradition from inside the palace walls. But back in Kamehameha's lifetime, their union had its share of passion too. You hear it in the chants, Mele Inoa, name songs composed for lovers, filled with layered metaphor earthy and celestial, tender and bold. In Hawaiian poetry, sex isn't euphemized, it's celebrated. Bodies are compared to mountains, oceans, blossoms, and birds in flight. Love is described not as possession, but as entanglement, interdependence, a dance of breath and heat. And Kamehameha? He danced that dance with many. Some relationships were brief, others enduring. Some had children, others didn't. But all contributed to his political vision. In one telling, he took wives from every major island he sought to conquer, not just for diplomacy, but to physically embody the unity he pursued through battle. You walk through the royal compound now, passing hail where lovers once lay beneath tapa cloth, the night air humming with wind and whispered chants. There are no frescoes here, no statues, but the stories survive, in songs passed down, in genealogies carefully memorized, in stones that remember footsteps even when history books forget. And what of same-sex relationships? They existed openly in pre-contact Hawaiian society, particularly among the Ali'i. Known as Icane relationships, these were close, sometimes erotic bonds between men, typically warriors or nobles, bound by affection, loyalty, and shared experience. These relationships weren't deviant or secret, they were honoured. Kamehameha himself likely had Icane companions in his youth. His early military successes are filled with stories of young men bound together in both combat and intimacy. But that openness faded under colonial pressure. Christian missionaries arrived, bringing with them rigid, imported notions of morality. Polygamy was condemned, Icane relationships were erased. Ka'ahumanu herself later converted to Christianity and helped enforce new laws that banned earlier customs, including the ones that had once shaped her own rise to power. The same woman who had broken taboos became an enforcer of new ones, and that's the core of the scholarly debate. Was Kamehameha's intimate life guided more by tradition or by ambition? Did he choose his wives for love, for strategy, or for balance of mana? Was he monogamous in any emotional sense, or did love in this world simply move differently? Less possessive, more fluid, more communal. You stand now at his final resting place, though no one knows exactly where that is. His bones were hidden by trusted retainers after death. In accordance with ancient custom, they believed that a great chief's bones held immense mana, so much that enemies could use them to curse a kingdom. So they vanished him into secrecy, into forest or sea, where only Sans knows. But you still feel him, in the waves, in the rock, in the stories that swirl with sea spray. Kamehameha loved as he ruled, strategically, powerfully, and within a system so unlike the Western myth of romantic exclusivity that it feels almost futuristic. And maybe that's the point. In his world, love wasn't possession, it was connection, and legacy wasn't built in solitude, it was shared, one hand at a time, across beds, across islands, across generations. Smoke coils in some still desert air. The sun is just beginning to fall behind the red cliffs of Medina, and the scent of date palms and frankincense lingers. You're in the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century CE, and it's not gold or marble that lines the streets, it's sand, soft underfoot and full of stories. Tonight you step quietly into the life of a man whose influence would reshape the world. Not a sultan, not a king, but a prophet. Muhammad ibn Abdullah, founder of Islam and, though often obscured in modern discourse, a man whose love life, marriages, and private relationships were deeply woven into the fabric of the early Muslim community. This is where it gets delicate. Reverence surrounds Muhammad's legacy. For billions, he's a prophet, a model of virtue, not a character in a bedtime story. But he was also human, someone who loved, grieved, desired, and formed deeply personal connections. And to understand his life fully, you need to step gently into that very human space. When he was 25, long before prophethood, he married Khadija bint Khuwaylid. She was 15 years older, a successful merchant, a widow, and his boss. She saw in Muhammad not just potential but integrity, and he saw in her a sanctuary. Their marriage lasted 25 years, through births, deaths, revelations, and rejection by the Meccan society. And though polygamy was common in Arabia, Muhammad remained monogamous to Khadija until her death. That's worth pausing on. Even after her passing, he would speak of her constantly, praise her loyalty, and weep over her memory. His other wives reportedly felt her presence linger like perfume, intangible but unmistakable. You walk with him through the dusty courtyards of Medina, where the homes are simple, built of mud brick and palm fronds. His own quarters are modest, no velvet, no gold, just a woven mat, a wooden bowl, and quiet space for reflection. After Khadija's death, his marriages take on a new shape. Many are political, meant to solidify tribal alliances and unify a fractured Arabian peninsula. But they are not loveless. They are filled with companionship, laughter, jealousy, loss, and yes, desire. One wife, Aisha bint Abi Bakr, becomes particularly central, not just in his personal life, but in Islamic history. She was young when they married, sharp-tongued, intellectually brilliant and incredibly close to him. They would race together for fun, she would tease him, he would answer. She narrated hundreds of hadith, sayings and actions of the Prophet, and scholars still pass her words like scripture. Their connection was vibrant, full of energy and mutual challenge. One story tells of her faking jealousy over another wife's cooking. Instead of solding her, Muhammad laughed right there at the dinner mat. But not all the relationships were easy. His polygamous household was full of personalities and jealousy ran hot. Tension between co-wives was real. There were moments of conflict, manipulation, sulking, all the things that make marriage a soup of humanity. And yet, he managed them with a kind of patient diplomacy, rarely raising his voice, often walking away when tempers flared. One wife once swapped a gift for another to provoke another's envy. He just smiled and shrugged. "Let it be," he said. "They are only women." Here's your quirky fact. The Prophet reportedly loved perfume. A lot. He wore musk, ambergris and rosewater, often applying scent before meeting his wives or the community. He once said that 3 things in the world had been made beloved to him: women, perfume, and prayer. And while the last gets most of the spotlight, the first 2 were expressions of beauty, closeness, and joy. In his world, love and spirituality weren't at odds, they danced together. Now the scholarly debate. How much of Muhammad's romantic life was personal and how much was political? Some historians frame his later marriages as alliances, ways to integrate former enemies, protect widows, or build new bonds between tribes. Others highlight the emotional connections he shared with the individual wives, especially Aisha and Sophia, the latter of whom came from a Jewish tribe and whose marriage to him helped heal a brutal wound in the community. Still others focus on the intimate rituals of his household, the way he washed, the way he spoke, the way he showed tenderness as a blueprint for Muslim marital ethics today. But one thing's certain, Muhammad's approach to love wasn't distant. He was emotionally available. He kissed his wives, sat with them, let them braid his hair. He wept openly. He grieved the loss of his children, and when he was nearing death, he asked to spend his final days in Aisha's room, his head resting in her lap, his breath fading between the walls that had once echoed with laughter, dibbes, and whispered prayer. You walk now through the Prophet's mosque in Medina. His grave lies under the green dome visited by millions, but it's not the marble or the crowds that move you, it's the simplicity of his life. His love wasn't explosive, scandalous, or excessive. It was steady, layered, responsive, sometimes joyful, sometimes sorrowful, always sincere. In a time when emperors used sex to display power, Muhammad reframed it as mercy, as trust, as sacred. His legacy in love isn't carved in stone or embroidered in gold, it's in the way he made people feel seen, known, loved. And as the sun disappears behind the horizon, and the call to prayer stretches through the city, you realize some rulers left palaces, others left poems, but he left a model. One that still echoes in the hearts of billions, not through conquest, but through kindness. You wake up to the sounds of a city breathing gold, clocks ticking, corsets tightening, and the low hum of scandal slipping behind curtains. This is Vienna, imperial and refined, a place where love wears a powdered wig and whispers in Italian at the opera. The year is 1760-something, and you're walking through the Hofburg Palace under a sky as pale as porcelain. Tonight, you are here for one woman, the one who reigned as Empress of the Habsburg Empire, ruled over 15 children and one of the largest dynasties in Europe, and still somehow had time to manage a personal life filled with contradictions. Maria Theresa of Austria, iron-willed, profoundly Catholic, mother to a continent, and quietly a woman of a great romantic depth. Now, most people picture her as a stern dowager in heavy brocade, but that's only the ending. Let's go back to when she was young, radiant, and very much in love. Her father, Emperor Charles VI, had no surviving sons, and after years of diplomatic backflips and bribery, the pragmatic sanction allowed her to inherit the throne. Except the moment she did, every man in Europe decided to challenge it. War exploded, but through all the fire and flint, Maria Theresa held on to one thing with a surprising kind of heat. Her marriage. She wed Francis Stephen of Lorraine, a man she had chosen not for politics, but for love. This was rare. Empresses didn't usually get options, but from the beginning she wanted him and made it clear. Their marriage was passionate, affectionate, and very physical, so much so that people whispered about how often she summoned him to her bedchamber. It's said she would interrupt state meetings just to drag him away for private time. When they were apart, she wrote him letters that included longing, flirtation, and some surprisingly sensual detail for an otherwise modest woman. You find yourself now in the intimate corners of the Schönbrunn Palace. It's still quiet. The walls are rose-coloured and the air smells faintly of lavender. In the Empress's writing room, where she penned policy and love letters in the same sitting, you see both a steel mind and a soft heart. Her correspondence with Francis includes not just updates on the Empire, but declarations like, "I miss your warm arms, and you are my only happiness." Even after having child number 11, she still referred to their bed as her favourite place to rest beside him. It wasn't all lust, it was attachment. Deep, emotional attachment. But here's where it twists. Francis, charming, cultured, and occasionally feckless, cheated on her. Multiple times, his infidelities were not hidden, and included affairs with noblewomen and even actresses. Vienna buzzed with gossip. Maria Theresa, heartbroken, never divorced him, never banished him, but quietly suffered. She tried to forgive, but she never forgot. And in court, she took careful steps to isolate his mistresses and erase their influence. Here's your quirky fact. She ordered that her daughters be taught the dangers of love, not just premarital scandal, but emotional entanglement. After her heart was burned by Francis's affairs, she became obsessed with arranging strategic marriages for her children. especially the daughters. Love, in her eyes, was now an unaffordable luxury, and yet, ironically, she raised one of the most famously romantic figures of the 18th century, Marie Antoinette. When Francis died suddenly in 1765, Maria Theresa shattered. She wore black mourning clothes for the rest of her life, 15 years. She covered the palace in black drapes. She refused to attend dances or theatre. But she didn't just grieve, she shut down emotionally. Her letters grew colder. She began to speak more often of God, sin, and regret. And although she continued ruling with authority, something in her dimmed. Her romantic fire had been bound to one man, and with his death, despite his betrayals, that part of her went dark. You walk now through the imperial crypt beneath the Capuchin church, where her tomb lies beside Francis's. Even in death, she had it arranged that her coffin would rest touching his, side by side. Carved on her tomb are the words, "Always united in love," despite the years of quiet pain she endured. And the scholars? They still argue. Was her marriage an ideal of 18th century royal romance, or a cautionary tale of emotional dependence? Some say she idealised Francis too much. Others see her as a woman who balanced statecraft and deep personal longing in a way few monarchs ever dared. Because in many ways, Maria Theresa was a contradiction, fierce in battle, but desperate for love. A woman who bore 16 children, yet still clung to romantic passion with the aching need of someone who believed in soulmates. She reformed education, military structure, and the economy, but never stopped longing for the one man who made her feel like more than a ruler. And let's be honest, in an age of cold dynastic unions, that craving made her rare, maybe even radical. As you leave the crypt and step back into the cobbled streets of Vienna, the bells chime softly above. Somewhere far off a violin begins, and you realise Maria Theresa's greatest love affair wasn't with her empire, it was with the one person who could never love her quite the way she deserved. The air shifts once more, this time warmer, tighter, like a stiff starched collar pressed too close to your throat. The faint hum of electricity rides just below the surface. There's no incense, no velvet canopy, no tribal drumbeat here. Now you're in the 20th century, industrial, urban, paranoid. You're stepping into the bedrooms and bunkers of modern rulers, where the love lives of emperors no longer hide behind poetry or silken fans. They blast from newspapers, state propaganda, and whispered recordings behind soundproof doors. Tonight we close our journey in the age of dictator chic, where raw power wears aviator sunglasses, poses shirtless on horseback, and has very questionable taste in both furniture and sexual ethics. You find yourself in Benito Mussolini's Rome first, Il Duce. The man who invented fascist branding, black shirts, sharp salutes, brooding stares. But what most history books skim over is the staggering number of lovers he juggled like propaganda headlines. Mussolini wasn't just obsessed with dominance in politics. He carried that obsession into the bedroom with the efficiency of a steam engine and the subtlety of a brick. He reportedly slept with multiple women every day, sometimes in quick intervals between speeches. His office had a hidden door that led to a private room with a single iron bed, where he would receive guests, sometimes in as little as 10 minutes. His longtime mistress, Claretta Petacci, was hopelessly devoted, keeping detailed diaries that reveal a man alternately affectionate, tyrannical, and childlike in his need for affirmation. Their relationship was chaotic. He cheated, she forgave, he growled, she adored. In the end, they died together, gunned down by partisans and strung up in a Milanese piazza, a grim testament to the loyalty lust can sometimes demand. Next stop, the Soviet Union. Joseph Stalin was a very different beast. If Mussolini's sex life was loud, Stalin's was hidden, corrosive, and soaked in fear. His first wife, Kata Svanidze, died young, and he supposedly said afterward that with her, all tenderness in him died too. His second wife, Nadezhda, shot herself after a fight with him during a state banquet. The official cause? Appendicitis. The reality? A slow collapse under the unbearable pressure of being married to a man who crushed cities for being uncooperative. There were rumours of affairs, of young secretaries summoned late at night, of purged lovers who disappeared into gulags or were erased entirely from photos. Nothing confirmed, nothing denied. Stalin was a master of silence, but the pattern suggests a man who wanted affection on his terms, unquestioning, disposable, and never powerful enough to challenge him. You walk past his dacha now, buried deep in the woods, surrounded by silence thick enough to feel. You can almost hear the sound of glasses clinking from an old dinner party, laughter forced, tension buried under every joke. In Stalin's world, intimacy wasn't closeness, it was control with a softer voice. Then there's Mao Zedong. The chairman of China walked through history in slippers and linen, quoting poetry and philosophy while reportedly sleeping with dozens, if not hundreds, of young women. In his later years, he supposedly believed that frequent sex with youthful partners would restore his vitality. Some accounts say he refused to bathe, claiming his lovers would clean him through their bodies. Yes, really. His doctor later published a memoir so graphic and politically damning that it was banned in multiple countries. But what stands out is how structured the system became. Young women chosen by handlers, brought in quietly, dismissed without ceremony. Here's your quirky fact. Mao reportedly kept a full-time staff whose job was to manage his personal affairs, including organising trysts, maintaining secrecy, and ensuring the women had been properly approved. It wasn't romantic, it was bureaucratic hedonism, the kind of sexualised state machinery that made even ancient Roman emperors look inefficient. And what's the scholarly take on all of this? Was modern dictatorship a continuation of imperial indulgence, or something entirely new? Most agree that these rulers, Mussolini, Stalin, Mao and others, were less about seduction and more about assertion. Their intimacy wasn't sensual, it was strategic, or worse, pathological. Love was replaced by loyalty, desire by access. The bedroom became an extension of the regime, cold-managed and built on imbalance. But not every 20th century autocrat ruled his bed the same way. Some, like Adolf Hitler, veiled their sexuality in mystery. Eva Braun was kept hidden for years, treated less like a partner and more like a secret hobby. Kim Il-sung of North Korea installed pleasure squads. Saddam Hussein reportedly used state security to stalk and abduct women for his personal pleasure. And then there were figures like Idi Amin and Muammar Gaddafi, whose abuses of power extended grotesquely into sexual violence. Reminders that in some regimes, the emperor complex left the palace and metastasized into horror. You walk now through the quiet halls of a Cold War-era bunker, concrete and airless. The bed in the corner is single, utilitarian. It looks like it belongs to a soldier, not a god, but make no mistake, it hosted decisions that changed the course of nations. These leaders didn't need silk sheets to command loyalty. Just fear, just silence, just the knowledge that saying no wasn't an option. And maybe that's the ultimate departure from the ancient world, where emperors once wooed with poems, gifted lands to lovers, or built monuments for their favourite concubines. The modern strongman didn't seduce. He consumed. He swallowed love whole and demanded more. As you leave the bunker, the sky feels too wide, too quiet. The romance of empire, it seems, finally gave way to something colder, less golden, less human, but still unmistakably imperial in how it centered one man's desires above all else. So we end where we began, in the bedrooms of the powerful. Sometimes they loved, sometimes they hurt, sometimes they tried to hold the world in their arms and found it slipping through their fingers. Passion was their engine, lust their strategy, and in the end, history remembers not just the wars they fought, but the people they loved, lost, used, or crowned with kisses.